Hey guys! Tonight we slip through torchlit corridors and the hush of a winter chapel to meet a baby wrapped in linen and politics. Matilda, born in 1102, tiny fist clenched like she already knows the royal sign for mine. You can hear banners tapping stone in a draft, smell tallow and fresh rushes, and feel the great machinery of a medieval court breathing all around you. Scribes scratching on wax tablets, stewards counting loaves, guards shifting in mail that rustles like rain. This is not a gentle nursery. It's an administration with a cradle in it. You probably won't survive this if you try to curtsy, memorize everyone's titles, and negotiate feudal loyalties before breakfast, but you're welcome to try. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing the sleepy constellation of cities in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand beside the fire and watch the court take in the news. A daughter to King Henry I of England and Matilda of Scotland. Yes, Matilda named for Matilda. Medieval parents loved recycling. The air tastes of smoke and baked oatcakes, and somewhere a clerk mutters numerals while sliding beads on a counterboard, because even joy must be audited. Mainstream fact, Henry I, nicknamed Beauclerk for his education, runs one of the most efficient royal households in Europe, tightening royal finances and extending written government with writs and rolls. You can feel that rigor even here, as the midwives finish their work and the steward notes exactly how many candles burned in the night, because candles cost money and kings count everything. Joke 1 leans on the doorframe. Medieval HR is very thorough. Someone is already drafting a memo about infant female, implications for succession, pending. Her mother, Matilda of Scotland, born Edith before she took a queen's name, moves through the chamber with a calm that smells of lavender and library dust. She's the granddaughter of Saint Margaret of Scotland, raised partly in religious houses, famous for piety and for coaxing generosity out of men who think coin grows on trees they own. She folds the linen tighter, hums a psalm, and you see the other half of the child's world, the gentle polish of devotion, literacy, and ritual. Quirky tidbit. The queen keeps a habit of washing poor pilgrims' feet in Advent, and court gossips argue whether she secretly prefers the chapel's quiet to the hunting field's noise. Either way, she carries a small book that smells like ink and lambskin and reads aloud when the corridors fall still. Historians still argue whether she had taken true vows in youth, her time in a convent complicating her later marriage, or whether she was simply educated there. Either way, Archbishop Anselm's counsel smoothed the path, and here we all are, a queen with a baby and a court with opinions. The cradle sits under a tapestry of stags. A nurse adjusts a charm, silver, simple, because bad air and passing envy are as real as drafts. You reach out and feel a soft palm that will one day grip a scepter, or at least try to. Historians still argue whether Matilda is born at Sutton Courtenay in Oxfordshire or elsewhere, and whether February or the broader winter claims the day, but the court's breath fogs in the same cold either way. The important thing is the arrangement of faces around her, a king who believes in order, a queen who believes in mercy, and a ring of lords mentally calculating the mathematics of heirs. You follow the baby through the first weeks, moving from nursery to chapel, chapel to hall. She is christened with water that smells faintly of stone and metal, placed in a cradle lined with fur, rocked by a tune that sounds like a distant river. Henry visits, eyes bright, mind already inventorying futures. He prefers hawks and hunting horns, but lingers at the cradle longer than he planned. Beauclerk counting possibilities instead of deer. Mainstream fact. Royal daughters in this age are not ornamental. They are diplomatic bridges. Their names are ink and treaties. Their journeys the roads empires walk. Joke 2 yawns softly. In modern terms, you've just been born with a LinkedIn profile and 3 pending connection requests from bishops. Lessons begin long before she can speak. A nurse puts a tiny hand around a wooden cup, teaching balance. A clerk lets her tap a stylus against wax, teaching sound and consequence. The queen traces letters on the baby's palm, whispering, A, like a prayer. The chamber smells of beeswax and warm milk. You spend afternoons in the queen's rooms, where women sew as they talk, saints on linen, vines that curl like promises, and where Latin phrases drift like incense. Mainstream fact: elite girls in Norman England often learn Latin prayers and French court speech. Matilda will grow fluent enough to manage in German courts later, but for now, her world is lullabies and blessings. Historians still argue whether she receives formal grammatical training or mostly devotional literacy, but you watch her mother press a psalter's margin with a fingertip and think, words will be her armor. Courtly drills seep in like rain through slate. You practice walking the rush-strewn hall without dragging your hem through spilled gravy, harder than it sounds. You learn the web of precedence. Who sits where? Who bows when? Who is pretending not to watch? The heralds rehearse titles in a rhythm that could be a poem if it weren't a maze. And you suspect even the dogs know protocol. Certainly the old greyhound, who only lies next to the queen's chair. Quirky tidbit. A page shows you how to warm a wax tablet by the hearth just enough to make writing smoother. For one beautiful moment, the tablet smells faintly of honey, then back to normal wax. Joke 3 glances at the ledger. The keeper of the buttery assures you that counting barrels is a spiritual exercise if you do it in silence. Henry's justice is a presence you can feel when you pass the door to the audience chamber. Petitioners shuffle in, farmers, knights, monks with tidy grievances, and shuffle out with writs, orders, or the exhausted look of people who encountered law instead of rumor. Mainstream fact: the Lion of Justice, as chroniclers dub Henry I, centralizes royal authority, expands the use of royal writs, and builds a more dependable exchequer. Government, in short, is becoming less personal thunderclap and more paperwork storm. The baby sleeps through most of this, but you don't. You absorb the cadence. Order, seal, dispatch, record. That drumbeat will echo later when she argues claims in measured phrases rather than hot ones. In quiet hours, the queen sings. The melody is simple, the words older than the walls. You sit by the brazier and stitch a mental map of the child's inheritance. England's shires, Normandy's duchy, Scotland's kin ties, and a Europe full of cousins with loud opinions. A messenger arrives wet with weather, shaking drips from his hood onto the tiles. His letter hints that German envoys ask questions about future matches. No one says emperor yet, but the vowel is in the air like a bird you can hear but not see. You tuck the thought away for a later road. Tonight the room is smaller. Nurse, baby, queen, the purr of a cat that refuses to respect rank. On a feast day, you step into the great hall where holly and bay hang in green garlands. The tables shine with pewter and the occasional splash of wine. Henry laughs at a tale about a bishop who fell off his horse, then turns grave at a rumor from the coast. He loves lampreys. There's your quirky morsel. And the kitchen obliges with dishes that gleam oddly in candlelight. You politely pass. Survival requires diplomacy, and tonight that means avoiding eels shaped like question marks. The queen, smiling, hands a trencher to a pilgrim and whispers another psalm under the noise. When night draws a curtain across the windows, you walk the passage by the chapel again. The baby stirs, clenches, releases. The queen's hand steadies the world with one soft touch. Historians still argue whether this infancy sets her character, whether early rigor and devotion forge the calm steel others later taste, or whether personality is a wilder thing that grows its own shape. All you can say is that the hall has taught a rhythm. Count, pray, learn, listen. In the cradle, a future almost queen exhales, and the candles lower themselves by millimeters. You close your eyes to the sound of wax cooling and a far-off steward adding up loaves, and you drift, knowing that tomorrow the drills begin again. Steps, curtsies, syllables, the choreography of power learned before shoes fit. You trade the rush-strewn halls for a wind that tastes of salt and iron, watching the king's ships bob like silver toys in the gray channel. Your cloak snaps, gulls scold. A clerk double-checks lists because that is what Beauclerk-trained clerks do. You carry psalms, linen, and an education in watching faces. Matilda, not yet a teenager, steps aboard with practiced calm, princess by birth, cargo of treaties by design. The deck creaks, the horizon blurs, and England slides backward into mist as you sail toward a language you don't speak and a crown that isn't yours. Joke 1 flutters off the mast. You discover that no one looks regal while seasick, not even a future empress. You disembark on a colder shore and join a caravan that clinks like a mobile treasury. Henry has sent a dowry heavy enough to make mules reconsider their life choices. Thousands of marks of silver. A mainstream fact that glints in every coffer and syllable. The road east smells of wet leather and wood smoke. At monasteries, you sleep beneath beams older than your dynasty and wake to bells that cut the fog into tidy hours. Quirky tidbit to pocket with your rosary. A hospitable abbot produces spiced wine sweetened with honey and insists it cures both chills and shyness. You nod politely and find that it at least makes the German consonants feel rounder. Historians still argue whether Matilda learned much spoken German or relied mostly on Latin and interpreters for public business. Either way, you practice greetings until they fit inside your mouth without tripping. Mainz rises ahead, a city of red stone and river light, and the cathedral stands as if it invented patience. The nave smells of beeswax and damp stone, the kind of perfume that says, "Time passes here in cathedral pace, not castle hurry." You move through processions, banners, reliquaries, the gleam of the imperial sword. You glimpse the octagonal crown with its hinged plates and stones like winter fruit. Someone whispers it's too heavy for long wear, more symbol than hat. A choir lifts plainchant into the rafters. The notes climb, settle, and circle like doves reluctant to leave. The wedding in January 1114 unfolds with choreography learned over centuries. You stand close enough to see how Matilda steadies her breath at each vow, how Henry V, older, composed, already practiced in disputing with popes and princes, keeps his gaze level. He is Romanorum Rex, king of the Romans, crowned emperor by 1111, and his world runs on ceremony sharpened by politics. The ring is lifted, the joining done, and you feel the shift beneath your shoes. A child of England becomes the central ornament of an empire's bargain. Joke 2 peaks from a misericord. Medieval weddings are 90% pageantry, 10% remember not to trip on your train, and she nails both. Feasting fills 3 squares of daylight. The aromas are a whole treaty. Roasted meats, caraway loaves, almond tarts, and a river of red wine that convinces even the shy to sing. Henry VI's men raise toasts to unity, while merchants calculate who just became a preferred supplier to the empire. Matilda exchanges pleasantries in careful Latin, pairs of bishops hovering like living footnotes. Mainstream fact. Queens and consorts intercede. Their polite requests, interventiones, show up in charters as formal nudges that could free a monastery from taxes or confirm a market day. You watch her practice the art. Soft voice, precise ask, glance to a notary who already has the formula ready. Life in the German court teaches different drills than Normandy. You attend diets, assemblies where princes gather under painted beams, and learn to read the wind of a room by how the counts adjust their gloves. In the chancery, wax glows like sunsets as seals are pressed into warm circles, your old trick of warming tablets by the hearth suddenly upgraded into statecraft. You trace the geometry of titles, Dukes of Swabia and Bavaria, Archbishops of Mainz and Cologne, names that sound like the snapping of banners. A notary lets you hold the pendant seal, heavy as a plum, and you wonder how many decisions a round of beeswax can carry. You also learn the empire's arguments. The investiture controversy still crackles, even after Henry V's rough Roman coronation in 1111. Popes and emperors keep a careful list of insults, in Latin, with witnesses. Bishops complain, princes posture, and somewhere in the middle of it, a very young queen smiles steadily and keeps track of which monastery needs which favor. Historians still argue whether she is merely a symbol in these years, or an apprentice in power, learning through charters she witnesses and petitions she carries. You watch her thank a canon for a sermon, then pivot to request a toll exemption for a nunnery, and suspect apprenticeship is the right word. There are journeys beyond Mainz. You ride in slow, jewel-toned caravans to Speyer, to Worms, to Cologne, each cathedral a stone forest with different birds in its upper branches. In Speyer, you kneel near the emperor's tombs and feel history press like a hand on your shoulder. In Cologne, you stare at a reliquary shaped like a church that fits on a table. Little arches, enamel saints, gold that glows like late afternoon. Quirky tidbit: a sacristan shows you a portable altar wrapped in embroidered silk, used so royalty can have mass anywhere. You think of your wax tablets and smile at the empire's devotion to travel-sized solutions. The calendar turns to fasts and feasts. Lent tightens belts, and kitchens produce fish pies speckled with herbs. Easter breaks open like a split pomegranate. Between, the court keeps moving. Petitions, arbitrations, a river of people with problems that only paper and seals can solve. Matilda's name begins to appear in documents. Matildis Romanorum Regina. Her consent noted, her presence recorded, the paper version of footsteps in snow. Historians still argue whether she received a separate Roman coronation around 1117, making her empress in more than courtesy. The charters tangle like ivy, and scholars untie the knots for sport. What matters tonight is simpler. She learns the shape of authority, where it yields and where it plants its staff. There are quieter rooms, too. In a cold gallery, a scribe teaches her the courtesy of margins. Leave space for correction, for gloss, for mercy. In a chapel, a canon drills pronunciation, so her Latin prayers ring clear against stone, not swallowed by it. In a solar, older ladies of the court explain the arithmetic of gifts, patterns of brocade that signal alliances, how many ells of silk equal a grudge forgiven. Joke 3 settles beside the brazier. You realize medieval diplomacy is part math class, part fashion blog, and part choir practice. Letters go home across the channel on rain-silvered days. She writes to her father with a hand that has grown steadier, customary greetings, updates on petitions granted, careful mentions of health. You smell the lamp-black ink, the resin of the seal, the damp of the courier's cloak. Somewhere in those dispatches, a daughter becomes a colleague. Mainstream fact: Henry I keeps close tabs through correspondence. He will later draw on this alliance to push English interests in Normandy, counting on the empire's shadow even when its light falls far. You fold the images into the scent of cathedral wax, into the cadence of bells that tell time like a patient schoolmaster. When winter returns, snow mutes the city, and the cathedral's breath smokes in the nave. You stand where you stood the day of vows, and listen to the same notes, now familiar. The girl who crossed a choppy sea has learned how to stand very still while a room moves, how to nod at the right moment, and then write the follow-up that actually does the work. How to carry a crown you rarely wear by keeping it balanced in people's minds. Historians still argue whether these years made her stubborn or merely revealed a spine tempered by liturgy and ledgers. You shrug into your cloak, warmed by beeswax and habit, and step out into the square where sleigh runners hiss on packed snow. Tomorrow will be petitions again. Tomorrow will be patience again. In the meantime, you let the bells fold the day one soft hour at a time. You ride out behind the imperial standard, the fabric slapping like a small thundercloud, and learn how power moves when it refuses to sit still. The court is a caravan of tents, kettles, vellum, and opinions. Cooks swing cauldrons over trench fires. Farriers sing to calm nervous horses. Notaries lug satchels with seals wrapped in leather like sleeping fruits. You keep your hands warm over a brazier, then warm the wax a moment longer between your palms, the way that clerk once taught you in England. Because on the road, the chancery is part camp kitchen, part choir, part traveling help desk. Matilda sits near Henry V beneath a striped awning and does not fidget. Her stillness is a skill, a signal as clear as a trumpet. The work will begin when she speaks. Joke 1 flickers with the embers. You've basically joined the 11th century version of a pop-up office. Take a number, mind the goats. Your petition will be heard in order. The itinerant year has a rhythm you feel in your knees. Spring pulls you along the Rhine, from palace to palace, Kaiserpfalzen, stone-backed and river-lit. At Ingelheim, the hall smells of wet wool and apple wood. At Koblenz, the wind off the confluence bites like mint. Mainstream fact: German kings rule by traveling, holding courts where the people are, rather than dragging everyone to a single capital. Charters sprout from saddlebags, not desks. You add a mental map to your psalter: Spire's red stone, Worm's echoing nave, Mainz's restless bells. Wherever the royal bench is set, the queue forms: abbots with land disputes, merchants with toll grievances, widows with parchment folded to softness. You learn triage. A steward whispers what can be handled with a word, what needs a charter, what needs a promise wrapped in a smile and sent to next month's diet. Matilda leans forward, a small tilt that means proceed, and a petitioner begins. You catch the verbs: grant, remit, confirm. The notary murmurs the formula. A marshal keeps the door honest. When a widow's voice shakes, Matilda's hand flattens the air, steady, and the room steadies with it. Her intercession becomes routine and visible, mainstream fact tucked neatly into the day. Her name appears in imperial documents, the interventio noted like a hinge. At the intercession of the queen, a way to swing stubborn doors open without a clang. She doesn't raise her voice, she raises outcomes. You trail a short campaign where the word campaign means more arguing than charging. Armor glints anyway, because princes like to look persuasive. A count insists a bishop trespassed past a boundary oak older than Charlemagne. The bishop insists the oak is merely enthusiastic shrubbery. You watch Henry hear both, but you watch Matilda watch the room. Who nods? Who glances at whom? Which abbot cannot meet which duke's eyes? When she finally speaks, it's a stone dropped into a bowl. Small, but ringing. A notary writes by torchlight, the ink smelling of lampblack and the iron of the pen nib, and you think, this is war by paragraph. Your title lesson arrives not in silk, but on parchment. Scribes begin to write Matildis Imperatrix, Matilda the Empress, though the crown she wears most days is made of expectation more than gold. Historians still argue whether she was formally crowned in Rome in 1117, or whether the title grew from marriage and recognition rather than a single anointing moment. The sources twist like ivy, clerks' hands leaving you a debate to tuck under your cloak for later. She wears the word carefully anyway, the way you would carry a full cup through a busy room. Joke 2 peaks over the rim. Empress turns out to be both a rank and a posture. And good posture is half the job when the crown is heavier than your neck prefers. Southward, you meet Italian light that looks older than your shadow. In Lombard towns, bells ring 2 notes at once, stepping stones of sound across bright squares. Henry presses claims linked to the late Countess Matilda of Tuscany, a different Matilda, as if Europe ordered the same name twice, and princely faces darken when imperial rights are mentioned. You attend councils where titles are unrolled like banners while city elders hold their ground with olive wood politeness. Mainstream fact. After the countess died in 1115, the emperor moved to assert imperial authority over her vast lands, stoking quarrels with popes and communes alike. You don't adjudicate the quarrel. You count the masks people wear when they argue, and sometimes you pluck one away with a sentence. On the road, you collect small, necessary oddities. Quirky tidbit. The field chancery keeps a little folding desk, oak legs that scissor out, a top that smells of resin, cubbies for pounce and pens, so the empire can sit down wherever the empire happens to be. The seal case rattles with tin molds. A clerk tucks the warm cakes of wax under his cloak in winter so they don't crack. Another clerk swears by a travel ink recipe thickened with wine. He calls it proof that piety and practicality share a cup. You try the pounce, a dusting of powdered cuttlefish bone to dry the wet script, and it leaves the faintest tang of sea, an ocean in every stoppered horn. You watch ceremonies multiply as if to make stability out of repetition. Investitures bloom with gloves and rings and oaths, movements measured like chant. Bishops kneel, princes frown thoughtfully. Someone coughs as though punctuation requires phlegm. The investiture controversy smolders, turning prayers into policy. You remember the thunder of Henry's Roman coronation years back? The papal arguments that refuse to go quietly? And you file away the patience required to wait for a compromise you cannot force. Historians still argue whether Matilda shaped any positions in these disputes or learned quietly on the bench. but you see her gauging mood the way sailors read the color of shallows. She is being trained by weather. There are brief courtesies that do a lot of work. A nun from a small Rhineland house offers a thin psalter bound in pale leather, and Matilda answers with a charter easing a toll on their ferry. An old knight, all scar and courtesy, asks clemency for a son whose fees are late. Matilda's question is a soft blade. "What have you given to the poor this winter?" And the answer, when it comes, purchases mercy. Mainstream fact. Charters of this era often embed such exchanges, piety braided to policy and prose that looks dry until you read the names aloud and imagine the hands. You follow the court into winter quarters at Spire, where cathedral stone sweats gently when snow piles up outside. The imperial necropolis sleeps below, emperors arranged like punctuation under your feet. A canon with eyebrows like ravens recites the genealogy of slabs. You nod solemnly at skulls you cannot see. Quirky tidbit slides from the sacristy. There's a travel altar with tiny hinges so mass can follow the court like a very polite suitcase. You think about your folding desk and grin. Even holiness packs flat when it needs to. Joke 3 leans on the pillar. Between portable altars and mobile writing tables, medieval life is basically a high-stakes camping trip with better Latin. Evenings in the solar have their own diplomacy. Ladies of the court teach you to measure gifts. So many ells of brocade to an archbishop, so many ermine tails to a duchess. A reliquary medal for the canon who knows everyone's nieces by name. You learn that a well-timed lamp filled with the right scented oil can tip a meeting toward kindness, that a new psalm tune humbly offered can turn a bishop's week. The Empress, yes, the word sits easier in the mouth now, keeps a ledger not of coins but of favors, promises, faces brightened and cooled. When spring shakes rain out of the clouds, you ride once more on muddy roads that smell of thaw and horses. Petitioners appear like shoots. A town wants market rights. A monastery wants the right to fish a broader bend. A merchant swears a toll collector is inventing new numbers. Charters stretch across the table like loaves. You cut slices with clauses, you butter them with seals. The Empress's hand settles, steady, steady, where tempers jump. Historians still argue whether she is shaping policy or simply fashioning consent. But either way, consent is a kind of royal metal, malleable only while it's warm. You blow on it with patience and pass it to the smiths. Night in camp sounds like a distant kitchen, ladles on pots, low talk, a spoon against a bowl. Somewhere a notary mutters the closing lines of a document by heart. Somewhere a guard shifts on creaking leather. Somewhere a woman behind a wool curtain braids a child's hair by touch. You sleep under the edge of the Empress's awning, warmed by the same brazier that softens the ceiling wax, listening to the rain stitch itself neatly along the tent's seam. In the morning, you will ride again, and the office will unfold again, and the still figure on the bench will carry an empire's posture like a cup filled to the lip. You will learn to walk beside her without spilling it. Night closes like velvet around the imperial camp when the rider arrives, his cloak crusted with salt, his breath a pale cloud that breaks against the tent flap. You are working by brazier light again, warming wax for another charter, when the messenger kneels and says a name you know too well. William. The word tilts the room. You steady the seal between your palms, but the warmth does not climb into your fingers. It drains, as if the candle has decided to burn the other way. He tells you about a harbor called Barfleur, about laughter too loud for late November, about a ship everyone called white, even when the sea turned black. You do not look at Matilda. You hear her not looking back at you. The brazier pops with a spark that sounds like a knuckle cracking. The news unspools in pieces, as news does. A captain with a proud name, Thomas Fitzstephen, had begged for the honor of carrying King Henry I across the Channel. Henry had already boarded another vessel. Prudence, impatience, or piety, take your pick. He declined, but he gave the ship to his son and heir, William Adelin, and a crowd of young lords who liked their wine as much as their titles. Mainstream fact sets down like a heavy cup. In November 1120, the white ship, Blanche Neuf, left Barfleur and struck a submerged rock just outside the harbor, sinking and drowning nearly everyone aboard, including the king's only legitimate son. Historians still argue whether the rock's old name was Quillebeuf or another local Teeth of the Sea moniker. But the sharpness is not in doubt. The channel keeps its knives near the surface. You close your eyes, and you're on that quay with them, whether you want to be or not. Torches painting gold on water, the hull gleaming like a well-polished boast. Sailors haul lines with the confident clatter of men who have done this 100 times. Young nobles jostle for space, glossy with silk and certainty. A rumor says the crew asked for more wine. To the rowers as well, for luck, and the casks obliged. Whether that rumor is truth or the sea's favorite smear job, you cannot say. The captain boasts that his ship will overtake the king's. Pride is an oar that digs deep even on calm water. They shove off into the dark. You taste salt in your mouth the way fear tastes when it remembers it has a body. The harbor narrows to a throat, the sea to a long inhale. The oars beat a tidy time. Then, wood on stone, a sound like a sentence breaking. A shudder that erases all the arguments a human heart uses to pretend it is in charge. The ship tears open. The cold is immediate. A kind of iron. People call for saints, for mothers, for names that will never answer from that water. A small boat lowers. Light, fragile, the kind of hope you shouldn't put in writing. William Adelin gets into it, and for a snapped thin moment, there is rescue in sight. Then he hears his half-sister's cry, Matilda, Countess of Perche, still on the sinking deck. He orders the boat back. The sea loves a good intention almost as much as it loves a fool, and in the crush of bodies, the little boat flips. The torchlight disappears with a hiss you hear in your bones. Quirky tidbit, morbid but true. Many chroniclers swear only one soul survived. A butcher from Rouen named Berold, who clung to the mast until fishermen pulled him out at dawn. He became the kingdom's most reluctant witness. Proof that sometimes history chooses the most ordinary throat to carry its most terrible news. Joke 1 blows out like a candle. If there's ever a medieval lesson about not overcrowding the lifeboat, it's that even in a crisis, the sea upholds capacity limits better than any bouncer. The writer's voice keeps going, because it must. Not just William, he says. Henry's illegitimate son Richard of Lincoln, gone. Matilda Fitzroy, Countess of Perche, gone. Names like beads snipped from a string. He speaks the word heir, and it falls into the brazier, turning red around the edges. Somewhere between sentences, he mentions that Stephen of Blois didn't sail. Illness, a last-minute upset stomach, a borrowed horse, and a prayer. Historians still argue whether Stephen bowed out before casting off or stepped ashore at the last minute because of a sudden flux. But the rumor endures like a nervous laugh. Sometimes dysentery turns out to be history's clumsiest guardian angel. Joke 2 tiptoes, respectful but honest. You wouldn't think a bad tummy could change a dynasty. And yet, here we are. Morning comes to Barfleur in the writer's story, and brings with it a shoreline littered with truths people will try not to believe. In England, the king hears and reportedly falls as if pierced, then rises into a life that, chroniclers say, never smiles again. Mainstream fact with a chronicler's flourish. Henry I's grief was famous enough for the scribes to shape it into a proverb. Whether never smiled again is literally true, or a tidy phrase for a man who refused to be seen laughing, is the kind of precision poets and auditors will battle over forever. You wrap your cloak tighter, because the tense air has learned how to be colder than weather. Matilda listens. She listens like a chapel does, by absorbing echo. The word only plants itself beside her. Only legitimate child of Henry I now. Only one the law can point to with a clean finger and say, this one. She is perhaps 18, perhaps already older inside than birthdays count. No one says succession out loud, because in rooms like this the louder a word is, the more fragile it becomes. But your hands know what the mouth won't say. You feel the line of inheritance rerouting like a river choosing a new bank after a flood. You think of the German court's careful drills, the intercessions, the charters, the practice of stillness, and you see how those quiet skills turn suddenly into weight-bearing beams. The sea pulled one pillar from Henry's hall. The ceiling will not stand unless another post is found and braced. Historians still argue whether Henry, who prided himself on calculation, had truly prepared himself to make a daughter his heir in a world that preferred sons, or whether necessity pushed him into a promise he thought he could manage later. They argue dates too. When he made up his mind, when he began to whisper to barons that their oaths might one day turn in a direction their fathers had not imagined. The arguments hum in the corners like bees trapped behind winter windows. For now, the world contracts to letters. Couriers pound ruts into roads between Normandy and England, between England and Germany. Seals are warmed, formulas adjusted. You remember your old trick of softening wax by the fire, and smile without humor, at how useful a small heat can be when everything else has gone cold. You draft condolence as statecraft, phrases that hold comfort in one hand and continuity in the other. The ink smells faintly of iron and the edge of grief. There are practicalities, because there always are. Ships inventoried, ports warned, lords counted like stars. Someone suggests commemorations. Someone else quietly asks how many lampreys the king is eating, as if appetite were a gauge on a dial of sorrow. You let the jokes be softer than usual. Joke 3 arrives with a weary shrug. The clerks decide to call the winter accounting season, because numbers behave when hearts will not. You keep your quips gentle, because even sarcasm should brush its hair before entering a room like this. You walk to the chapel with Matilda, and stand in air that smells of stone and wax, and the green apple scent of fresh linen. She kneels, not because kneeling answers anything, but because bodies need shapes to pour grief into. A chaplain reads psalms carefully, each syllable a bead slid along a cord. You watch her head bow, rise, bow again, and you know that when she stands, she will do the work set in front of her. Mainstream fact points forward. Within a few years, Henry will summon his barons and make them swear to accept Matilda as his heir. But tonight, the oath is not on anyone's lips. Tonight, the only oath you can keep is to stay beside her until the brazier dies and the ink dries, and someone somewhere is brave enough to say future out loud. Outside, rain begins, polite as a clerk knocking at a door. The messenger sleeps by the coals, boots still on, the salt in his cloak returning to the sea in the tiny indoor way salt does. You ease down onto a stool and let the rhythm of drops against canvas measure the night. Tomorrow will be letters, and after that, more letters, and after that, the slow, complicated work of turning a disaster into a plan. The channel has claimed a prince. It has also, without meaning to, launched an empress toward a crown the wind will never let sit steady. You close your eyes and see torchlight on black water, and beyond it, a thin line of mourning you will have to walk as if it were a road. You wake to the weight of decisions dressed as ceremony. The brazier is already lit. Someone with tidy handwriting has been up since dark, and the corridor smells of beeswax, wool, and the breath of people rehearsing important faces. Word travels like a quiet drum. Winter court, summons to the great hall, cloaks brushed, gloves mended, tempers buttoned. You slip into the tide of lords and churchmen and watch the furniture of history get moved into place with the same care as a heavy table. Matilda stands beside her father, black silk simple and exact, a widow at 20-something since the emperor died in 1125, an heir apparent because the sea rewrote the guest list. The king's voice is not loud, but it carries. He speaks of order, of the realm, of the need for continuity when storms take what should have been a bridge. Then he says her name in the sentence that matters. This one will succeed me. You feel the air tighten, then hold. Chroniclers will set ink to this day as if it were a hinge that squeaked. Mainstream fact. In 1126-27, Henry Saud compelled his leading barons and bishops to swear oaths recognizing Matilda as his heir, once in the deep winter gathering and again in renewals that followed. You watch the choreography. Bishops first, then earls, then the complicated queue of everyone who thinks they're more important than their cloak suggests. Each comes forward to touch gospel and relic, to lay hands in the old style and breathe formulas they've said before, only never to a woman. Historians still argue whether the first sworn place was Westminster or another royal lodging that December, and whether the wording promised the crown itself or a softer recognition. but your ears record the shape. Fealty to the king's daughter, the future wrapped in a vow. The objects on the table look simple, and none of them are. A gospel book smells of vellum and old rain. A reliquary shaped like a forearm, silver glove over saintly bones, rests on green cloth. Quirky tidbit. Those arm-shaped reliquaries are meant to suggest the saint's own hand blessing the oath. People press their fingers to a metal palm that has never once fumbled a promise. A clerk catalogs who swears on what, because that matters later when memories accidentally develop scenic embellishments. You slide closer and see names you will chase for years. Robert of Gloucester, the king's towering illegitimate son. David, future king of Scotland and Henry's brother-in-law. Stephen of Blois, quick to kneel and quick to smile with the kind of face that looks like it always agrees. Joke 1 flicks its quill. He clicks, "I agree to the terms and conditions," with heroic confidence and absolutely no intention of reading the fine print. The hall's grammar is the grammar of power. Who stands, who sits, who looks steady while others blink too much. Matilda does not bow her head when people expect her to flinch. She looks at each oath-taker with the same lighthouse patience. Bright, still, not negotiable. The king, Beauclerk to the marrow, turns the moment into paper. Writs are prepared in triplicate, seals warmed until their faces yield. The exchequer men, never off duty, whisper about the cost of hosting this many very hungry consciences. Joke 2 tugs your sleeve. The candlekeeper mutters he'll need a subsidy for excess sanctity lighting, which you privately agree should be a line item. After the formalities, the arguments, never spoken into the air the king still occupies, begin to hatch in corners. Can a woman rule? Murmured in Latin by men who have watched queens run treasuries without admitting it aloud. Will her husband rule for her? Asked by earls who own more lances than salters. If the king marries again and begets a son, do we get a mulligan? You listen, because listening is your craft. Historians still argue whether these oaths were heartfelt allegiance to a female sovereign, pragmatic obedience to a strong king, or a placeholder until male luck returned. The phrasing in some charters cuddles the ambiguity. Heir, rather than queen. Domina instead of regina, a future wrapped in Latin cotton. By late afternoon, your legs learn the liturgy of cues. You help a bishop find the right page. You hand a notary the pounce to dry the lines. A young knight in a brand new mantle asks too loudly whether he should kneel to the Empress or to the Lady. The usher says both, because ushers know the shortest road through a quarrel. Matilda's veil does not move, only her eyes soften when a very old lord with stiff fingers fumbles, and she quietly turns the book toward him. The hall notices. Mainstream fact laid down like signposts. Contemporaries noted her self-command, her insistence on style and precedence. Flinty, some said. Composed, others said. The kind of posture that either attracts loyalty or irritates pride depending on the hour you meet it. Night brings the softer binding agents, food, small kindnesses, rumor. At the high table, the king tests a slice of lamprey pie and, finding it survivable, nods to the carver. You politely still decline because you enjoy living. A jongleur sings a poem about faithfulness that rhymes crown with renown, and a sharper steward mutters alternate lyrics under his breath. Stephen makes a graceful toast that tastes like agreement, even when you strain to hear the clauses. Robert of Gloucester drinks quietly and watches the room with a soldier's weather eye. Joke 3 turns up with the cheeses. Some bright spark proposes commemorative spoons, oath spoons, engraved with tiny relic hands, and you begin to suspect someone has a nephew in the silver trade. Then the renewals. Because important promises are like candles in drafty rooms, you relight them often. In early 1127, with the winter still in the mortar, more magnates gather to reaffirm what the first had sworn. Normandy hears it too. The script crosses the channel with the seals still warm. You travel with packets that thud against your belt like flat loaves, the cords braided, the wax bright as dried cherries. At monasteries, abbots touch the bone hand and speak the words. At castles, earls swear and cup their doubts like embers. Mainstream fact. Robert of Gloucester is among those who swear and will one day prove it with steel. Stephen is among them too. Proving the difference between oath and outcome can be miles wide and paved. In private, Matilda takes the weight no ceremony can carry for you. She writes, she thanks, she promises, she inquires about health with the precision of someone who values the ledger of favors almost as much as the seal roll. A clerk remarks that her letters read like architecture. Arches and buttresses built of clauses, no drama wasted, all load-bearing. You think back to the girl who learned to stand still in German light and the young widow who listened to a sea deliver bad news. The practice has been for this: to hold a room without raising your voice, to convert ritual into momentum, to turn a command into a network that doesn't topple the first time weather changes. And yet you feel the new weather rolling in from the south like the smell of rain. Whispers curl around the hearth about marriage, about an Angevin teenager with a sprig of broom in his badge and a temperament that might sand against English pride. Not tonight. Not yet. Tonight the hall smells of wax and rosemary and the salt of men who said the words because a king was watching. Historians still argue whether the oaths would have held if nothing else had changed. The century never gives you that laboratory. It gives you people. It gives you roads. It gives you a princess who has become an empress, who may have to become a queen by walking through a wall no one has unlocked before. You bank the brazier, stack the spent candles like little monuments, and listen to the scrape of benches as the hall empties into winter. The vows are spoken. The ink is dry. The future is, for one very quiet moment, legible. You smell the Loire before you see it. Wet stone, reeds, tar on boats, slick as beetle backs. And you hear the clatter of hooves in a town that likes its roofs steep and its tempers steeper. The yellow broom blossoms are everywhere, little suns nodding on hedges and hillsides, and some bright soul has pinned a twig into your cap, because apparently you are on Team Anjou now. Word runs through the lodgings like steam. The king's daughter is to marry a count's son. Oaths and strategy will be folded into a wedding mass, and the border of Normandy will sleep easier if everyone remembers which side of the river to keep their armor on. You tug the sprig into a less pokey angle and follow the procession toward Le Mans. On the way in, a flash of copper hair, a green cloak cut to move like a banner, and boots too clean for anyone who's just ridden a long road. Geoffrey of Anjou, 15 and already nicknamed Le Bel, the Fair, for a face that seems designed to make troubadours overdo it. He handles his charger like a boy who grew up with a bridle in his hands. He handles glances like someone who enjoys being looked at. You glance toward Matilda, mid-20s, widow of an emperor, steady as a cathedral column. The space between their ages hums like a wire. Joke one leans against a wine cask. You've seen worse premarital counseling than one partner brings a Europe-sized resume, the other brings excellent hair and southern alliances. The pageantry sharpens. In Rouen, just days before the wedding, Henry I to himself fastens the sword belt and makes Geoffrey a knight, mainstream fact with the ring of metal. June 1128, the English king dubs the Angevin youth, an anointing by steel that says we are family now as loudly as any sermon. Then Le Mans rises with its half-Roman, half-Gothic shoulders, and cathedral bells cut the cloud into hours. The nave smells of beeswax and damp limestone. The floor holds the footfalls of nervous courtiers like a secret. Matilda and Geoffrey stand together, and you watch her study him the way a chess player studies the board before touching a single piece. Their vows are clean and careful. Her veil barely stirs. He doesn't fidget, but you can feel the effort. Feasts bloom like peonies. Loaves with caraway. Eels in bright sauces you still politely decline, because lampreys have not improved since last time. Roast fowl carried as if the birds might still escape. Fulk Fiv, Geoffrey's father, presides like a man already half-turned toward another horizon. He will head east soon, a mainstream fact you file with a shiver to claim a new crown in Jerusalem. The air tastes of pepper and old wine, and the talk tastes of maps. Maine, Anjou, Normandy, who keeps which castle key on which belt. Matilda exchanges courtesy Latin with bishops and plain French with counts' ladies. Geoffrey laughs with squires who want to show him a new saddle stitch. Everyone is polite about the age gap, the way people are polite when they have several motives and only one face. You learn Anjou's rhythms. The markets clatter with copper pots and bold fabrics. The rivers glide in patient loops. The castles throw their shadows long at afternoon. Matilda rides in a saddle she chooses herself, sits a council where the candles gutter in drafty corners, and writes letters that land in Rouen like carefully thrown ropes. Geoffrey trains at the tilting yard until dusk, then returns smelling of horse and laurel, just pleased enough with himself to make you roll your eyes, and then forgive him because he is, inconveniently, very good at the thing he enjoys. Quirky tidbit. The broom sprig, Plantagenista, turns up in Geoffrey's cap and on his livery, a cheerful botanical brand that will later, retroactively, name a dynasty. Historians still argue whether he ever called himself Plantagenet in life, or whether later chroniclers, centuries on, pin the nickname into history's hat. The sprig in your own cap scratches either way. Then the prickles begin. In council, Matilda expects deference earned by experience and birth. Geoffrey expects a wife who is not an emperor, because emperors are notoriously hard to live with at breakfast. She is used to the measured gravity of imperial diets and the diplomacy of Latin. He is used to fast decisions, quick rides, and the way a count's will can turn a county like a plow turns a furrow. They are both right. They are both wrong. The first quarrels arrive like summer storms, loud and brief, but very wet. Joke 2 keeps its voice down. Medieval couples therapy looks a lot like, please write to your terrifyingly organized father and ask him to mediate, which is effective and also not relaxing. Henry Furious mediates. Of course he does. Letters cross the channel thick as gulls, all seals and soothing. He promises revenues, clarifies dower lands, reminds Geoffrey that knights look taller when they stand on solid law. He reminds Matilda that alliances are living things, not just charters. Mainstream fact to anchor the fuss, the match aims to knit Normandy's southern border to an Angevin shield, balancing against rivals like Blois and making Stephen's family think twice about mischief. Historians still argue whether this marriage alienated key Norman barons enough to poison the oaths they had sworn. Whether marrying an Angevin felt to some like handing the duchy's keys to a neighbor they like to insult. The debate hums in the margins of every charter you file. There are separations, short, sharp, corrective. Matilda withdraws to her own lands more than once, asserting dignity the way other people slam doors. Geoffrey, pride stung, rides harder, and wins too many compliments at tourneys. You, who are not asked for an opinion but have one anyway, notice that their letters are better than their breakfasts. On paper, their sentences interlock. In the hall, their tempers do. Then comes a season of quieter ground. A winter spent in the same rooms without firewood becoming kindling for another argument. A spring council where they answer the same petitioner with the same measured yes. Quirky tidbit to keep you human. Somewhere in this thaw, Geoffrey sends Matilda a small enamel brooch from Limoges, blue as river light, with that ridiculous broom sprig rendered so tiny it looks like a joke. She wears it anyway. Meanwhile, the Norman barons watch like cats at a dovecote. Robert of Gloucester weighs the Angevin alliance, sees the military sense, and keeps his counsel. Stephen smiles across the channel with the sort of agreeable face that can be stapled to any policy. Henry's exchequer hums. Writs cross seas. The king calculates which castles to place in which trustworthy hands, draws lines under tallies, and eats the fish he likes with the stubbornness of a man who refuses to be revised by grief. Mainstream fact. Henry invests Matilda with revenues and lands in Normandy to strengthen her hand. He continues to manage barons with a Beauclerk's grip, fully expecting his careful system to carry past his own breath. Historians still argue whether he ever truly believed the realm would accept Geoffrey as consort king, or whether he assumed his daughter's name would do the next heavy lifting, while Angevin muscle guarded the roads. In Anjou, you keep noticing how noise quiets when Matilda speaks softly. A guildmaster brings a dispute about tolls. She tilts one clause against another, and the problem settles like flour in a jar. Geoffrey orders a circuit of the border castles. He returns with a list of repairs and a dusting of limestone on his boots. eyes bright the way they get when steel and stone have agreed to behave. They begin to look not the same, but in the same direction, which is the first miracle of politics and marriage both. Joke 3 nods at the table where maps multiply. You realize this household runs on 2 fuels, ink and horse sweat, and that both stain, but in compatible colors if you're lucky. At Le Mans one afternoon, you climb the tower stair and look over a countryside that will one day be a family myth. The hedges are green stitches. The roads are brown threads. The towns, small beads of smoke and bell metal. Somewhere out there, future claimants will march. And somewhere in this hall, documents will be written that tell them where to stop. You straighten the broom sprig in your cap and admit, quietly, that the brand is working on you. The yellow suits these gray skies. Letters to Henry continue. Updates, requests, a paragraph that reads like a sigh and ends like a soldier's plan. The king replies with coins and counsel, with a patience that sounds like iron being drawn into wire. You sit at the table where their correspondence meets, and realize you are watching a bridge get built in sentences. Anjou to Normandy, Normandy to England, duty to desire, youth to experience. The planks are not even yet, they will hold. As summer exhales into another autumn, rumors drift in with the apple smell. The possibility of an heir, the more immediate certainty of new campaigns in Normandy, the ever-present murmur that some men will never swallow the idea of a woman's claim unless it is served with victories. You pack the charters, warm the wax, oil the bridles. The hedgerows glitter with yellow flowers like a polite heraldry that doesn't need to shout to be remembered. You pull your cloak tighter and follow Matilda and Geoffrey out into roads that lead, inevitably, toward the duchy's stone chessboard and the question a kingdom keeps trying not to ask out loud: who sits the next throne? You ride with damp Saul in your hair and parchment in your satchel because Normandy is less a single country and more a chessboard set up on a windy table. Squares have names like Caen, Bayeux, Lisieux, Falaise. Stone rooks that watch each other across hedgerows, stitched tight as a quilter's pride. You move through halls that smell of hearth smoke and old iron, and everywhere you go, keys jingle on belts like small opinionated bells. A Castellan bows, produces a key the size of a dagger, and you try not to look like a janitor while accepting sovereignty, one key ring at a time. Joke 1 rattles politely. You have never carried so many temporary keys that no one intends to return. The rhythm this season is treaties in the morning, garrisons by dusk, letters whenever the candles behave. Matilda rides custody circuits with Geoffrey, then without Geoffrey, then with him again. The pattern changing the way weather changes in Channel Light. Mainstream fact. She returns briefly to England in 1131 when Henry V gathers another great court to renew the oaths. Then, with the words still warm, she crosses back to Normandy to live where the claim will be tested, not just toasted. In Ruins Hall, you feel the ink of that promise dry into practice. Officials bring rolls that smell like damp wool. A clerk from Caen rehearses tallies as if they are psalms. A messenger from Avranches stamps mud on the flagstones and asks for new orders without catching his breath. Falaise rises on its rock like a clenched hand. You stand under walls that remember William the Conqueror's cradle and note the genealogy of stone. The tower older than the keep older than the last patch of mortar. From here, the duchy looks neat, green squares, brown lines, but up close, every line is a negotiation. Geoffrey wants Angevin captains where the road runs soft. Norman lords want Norman faces in Norman castles because pride is a garrison too. Matilda sits the bench with hands folded while men describe thorn bushes as if they were borders, then untangles a path between honor and utility. Historians still argue whether Henry I intended to grant Geoffrey formal authority in parts of Normandy before his own death, or merely allowed him a long on-the-job interview. The charters show hints both ways, and the silence between those hints is where tempers live. Then, in Le Mans, where the cathedral stones keep winter inside them even in March, a cry sharp as air after bells. Matilda's first son arrives, Henry, red-faced, furious that the world is both cold and impressive. Mainstream fact anchors the day. The child who will be Henry II of England is born on March 5, 1133, at Le Mans. The nave smells of incense and wet wool. A bishop smooths oil over a brow the size of a walnut. The font gleams like a small, cold moon. Quirky tidbit. At baptism, the priest places a pinch of blessed salt on the infant's tongue. Protection, wisdom, a miniature covenant with a flavor, so somewhere between the chrism and the swaddling, your future king smacks his lips like a tiny connoisseur. You tuck that into memory, right next to the broom sprig brooch she still wears on days when alliances need reminding. The birth rolls outward like a soft drum beat. Couriers sprint to Rouen and across the water to Henry I, whose reply is half blessing, half spreadsheet. Grants confirmed, dower revenues sharpened, gifts for the midwives noted because Beauclerc never forgets who keeps the engine oiled. Geoffrey glows in public and privately redoes his mental map with a new center, this small, howling axis around which counties might one day turn. Joke 2 warms the room. Nothing solves a succession argument at a dinner table like a baby with impeccable timing and lungs. A year later, the pattern repeats. Quicker. In 1134, another son, Geoffrey the Younger, arrives, likely at Rouen, though the cradle remembers more softly than the record does, and some chroniclers point to other towers with confident fingers. Historians still argue whether Rouen deserves the credit or another Norman stronghold does. Either way, you hold a swaddle that smells of milk and linen, and realize the claim is now a braid. Mother's right, father's lands. Sons to tie the knot tighter. Nurses murmur saints' names. A clerk drafts a brief note that reads like a ledger and a lullaby. The city bells layer over each other until the air shakes pleasantly. Between births, you go back to keys and clauses. At Argentan, you correct a garrison list that reads like someone copied the wrong column. At Exmes, you smooth a quarrel where a Norman lord has taken offense at an Angevin captain's boots. Truly, the boots. And Matilda resolves it by assigning the captain to a different tower where his boots offend fewer stones. In Bayeux, merchants plead for market protections, citing charters older than anyone's knees. Matilda points to the line that matters and redraws the fee so it pinches less and holds more. Mainstream fact, Norman government by this date is a literate machine. Ducal writs, seals, rolls, mirroring England's paperwork storm. You feel the hum of it under your hands like a cat purring on a ledger. The French king's shadow leans across the board from Paris, testing edges with the patience of a man used to maps. Scouts bring rumors like weather. A Beaumont twin sniffing around a border. A Breton lord admiring a ford too much. A Castellani whose oath rings hollow at the bottom. Geoffrey rides circuits beneath banners that collect road dust the color of unbaked bread. Matilda rides too when the message needs the weight of a duchess who knows how to make rooms stand up straight. She keeps Robert of Gloucester near on letters, and nearer in mind, the reliable half-brother whose men can turn argument into geometry if required. Historians still argue whether she, more than Geoffrey, chose which lords to court and which to cow in these years. The survival of her correspondence suggests a hand not just on the seal cord, but on the line of the sentence that makes steel move. Le Mans becomes a cradle and an office. You learn the hopscotch from nursery to council chamber. A nurse hands you a bundle, a steward hands you a petition. You return both, warmed. When the baby sleeps, ink flows. When he wakes, the room loosens. A visiting abbot blesses the infant's fist with a thumb that has turned 1,000 pages. Matilda smiles the small, edged smile of someone who understands both the power and the paperwork of sons. Quirky tidbit slips in with the laundress. Swaddling bands here are embroidered with tiny blue crosses not for decoration, but to discourage the evil eye. If superstition and sewing bolster theology and law, nobody complains. Across the channel, Henry I officials count shires and lampreys with equal vigor. He names sheriffs like chess moves, invests revenues on Matilda's behalf, and writes letters that sound like well-bred thunder. In Normandy, you keep the edges mended. A treaty with a border lord is sealed under an awning because the chapel's roof leaks. A truce with a neighbor counts the number of days it takes for a messenger to ride from Lisieux to Sées, because even peace needs math. Joke 3 peaks over your wax cakes. Negotiating fortnight and a day clauses is the medieval version of business days apply. And yes, everyone pretends they understand the calendar the same way. By late 1134, the board looks playable even with the wind trying to tip it. Two sons in the nursery, castle keys redistributed without too many bruised egos, correspondence with England steady, if heavy with Beauclerc's expectations. You walk ramparts where ivy fingers the joints between stones, and think of the white ship's water and the salt that rewrote a realm's plan. The road ahead smells of rain. You hear in it the question that will shiver everything soon enough: how fast a crown can move when the hand that holds it stops. But you don't look past the next clause, the next seal, the next ride to a gate where an old porter smiles because he remembers your name and your careful way with keys. For now, the channel winds blow kinder. The nursery is a soft thrum behind stone, the council a harder rhythm before it. The chessboard holds, even when pieces slide. You adjust the broom sprig pin, check the wax, count the riders, and whisper a gratitude you do not write down. Not for peace, that word is too ambitious, but for balance, even the precarious kind, and for the small, salty prince, who has made arguments shorter and futures longer simply by arriving and wailing on time. You smell it before the courier speaks. A kitchen's proud perfume gone sour. Lampreys. The word hangs in the air like a guilty cough, and then the message arrives in a room crowded with seals and winter breath. The king is dead. Henry I, Beauclerc, the man who turned government into a marching band of writs and tallies, breathes his last at Lyon-la-Forêt in December 1135, after ignoring physicianly advice about eels that look like punctuation. Mainstream fact lands with a thud you can feel through the trestle. He dies in Normandy on December 1st, and within hours the lines of succession begin to wobble like tables with one leg suddenly shorter. You steady your hands over the wax, but the flame has learned a new draft. Joke 1 peeks through your fingers. It turns out the deadliest thing at court wasn't a sword, it was a dinner entree with a grudge. The corridors fill with that particular silence that comes when everyone is talking very quietly at the same time. You remember the oaths? Books, bones, hands. But vows lose volume when the mouth that demanded them goes quiet. In Anjou and Normandy, Matilda's household shrinks to a hard point of attention. She is heavy with a third child. The midwives counting weeks like coins. Geoffrey stalks maps. Robert of Gloucester reads weather in couriers' faces. Across the water, a cousin moves fast. Stephen of Blois, amiable kneeler, gifted smiler, owner of excellent timing, gallops to Boulogne, secures ships, and rides for London as if the road has been saving itself for him. Mainstream fact: Stephen reaches England before Christmas, is acclaimed by Londoners, and is crowned at Westminster on December 22nd, 1135, with his brother Henry of Blois smoothing ecclesiastical feathers, and Archbishop William de Corbeil doing the anointing. The bells don't ask many questions. Bells love occasions. You stand in a drafty hall and listen to the counter-narrative tighten its laces. But the oaths? But the gospel and the bone hand? Stephen's camp circulates a tidy argument that the promises were coerced, that the realm needs a warrior on the spot, that a woman's rule would be uncertain, a word that does a lot of work while pretending to be modest. Henry of Blois writes like a man who knows which shelf the persuasive Latin lives on. Historians still argue whether Stephen's move was a rehearsed coup lubricated by churchmen or an opportunistic sprint that found doors already ajar. Either way, the crown sits before the fire getting warm, and you can't help noticing how quickly people adopt its temperature. News crosses the channel with salt still in it. Matilda does not break, because breaking is not how she has been trained. She recalculates. The nurse douses the brazier because the room is too warm for a woman who is timing contractions between political sentences. Geoffrey dictates letters with a sword still on the table, as if grammar requires a scabbard nearby. Robert of Gloucester, that reliable hinge, sends messages to castles that remember their manners. Quirky tidbit to soften the edge. A midwife swears by tying a red thread on the mother's wrist to protect against envy while she labors. You have seen saints' bones do stranger duty, so you nod and let the thread sit. Historians still argue whether pregnancy alone delayed Matilda's immediate crossing, or whether Geoffrey's fresh fighting in Normandy and thin reliability among certain Norman barons made caution wiser than speed. You only know that letters sweat, and men do too. Meanwhile, Stephen builds a stage. He issues a Charter of Liberties early in 1136, promising to undo the harsher noddings of his predecessor. Sheriffs reined in, forests less hungry for fines, church lands soothed. Mainstream fact: that charter is a public relations masterclass, deliberately echoing Henry I's own coronation promises of 1100, as if to reassure the realm that this is continuity wearing kinder shoes. London applauds. Earls who like prompt paydays applaud louder. Some bishops applaud with two hands and one raised eyebrow. Joke 2, gentle as a cough behind a choir screen. You've never seen an IOU look more like a hug. In Normandy, the board flips. Geoffrey rides hard along borders that fray when a crown changes pillows. There are skirmishes sharp as snapped icicles. There is a wound that has people whispering in corridors until he shows himself at a window just long enough to turn rumor into ordinary worry. Matilda's quill keeps time with messengers' hooves. She addresses abbots with the balm of courtesy, castellans with the geometry of supply, and cousins with a tone that sounds like family until it doesn't. Domina appears on documents with a weight that says, "I will cash this later." Historians still argue whether she could have secured more Norman castles in late 1135 had Geoffrey yielded more spotlight, or if Norman pride would have balked either way at Angevin boots on familiar stairs. The debate has dust on it, but the dust smells like real thresholds. Then the small cry that changes the room. In 1136, Argentin claims it, Anger makes a case, the nurse insists only that the child arrived where the sheets were clean. Matilda gives birth to William, later nicknamed Fitz-Empress, the third thread for the braid. Mainstream fact: William will grow to marry the Warrenne heiress and knot himself into English nobility nicely, even if crowns avoid him. For now, he is a bundle wrapped tight, a fist that opens only when a bishop touches oil to his brow. Quirky detail slid in by a smiling priest. A pinch of blessed salt touches the infant tongue, and the baby winces as if already suspicious of paperwork. You feel the floor steady half an inch under your feet. Babies do that to floors. Across the water, Stephen tours the realm with a timetable sharper than his sword. Winchester to cement the treasury, London to kiss the hand that rings the bells, castle after castle to exchange keys for promises and promises for pardons. Men who swore to Matilda swear to him too, because oaths like crowds. Some make themselves useful by explaining, with the solemnity of men describing a sunrise, that they always meant to support whichever cousin got there first. You keep a list. You underline some names twice. Joke 3 arrives with a chapped smile. The silver trade booms because every new king needs a new seal. And nothing says stability like changing the stationery. Letters to Rome flutter like winter birds. Stephen seeks papal blessing. Matilda's allies insist on the sanctity of oaths. Both sides learn that delays can be as eloquent as decrees. In Normandy, Geoffrey leverages the French king's interest. In England, Stephen leverages London's impatience for quiet streets and full markets. Historians still argue whether London's acclamation should count as a constitutional act, the city electing its king by custom, or as theatrical applause for a decision already muscled into place. They also argue whether Henry of Blois released peers from their oaths out of principle, pressure, or very practical sibling loyalty. The arguments hum like bees in parchment hives. You move in small circles that still feel like strategy. A nun with good penmanship copies Matilda's letters until her fingers cramp. A steward counts carts for a future crossing. A smith repairs stirrups with a concentration that makes you wish all politics were iron. Matilda practices stillness while the baby sleeps against her, then breaks the stillness to dictate a letter that smiles with its teeth. She reminds a lord of the gospel and the bone hand. She reminds another of a debt that smells like last year's wine. The room breathes when she stops. She drinks water, and only water. You've all had enough of lampreys for one generation. The year lengthens. Stephen moves quickly, and quickly earned things need constant tending. Welsh borders twitch. Northern earls examine their reflections and see kings in them if they squint. Robert of Gloucester waits, measuring his moment with that soldier's patient arithmetic. You fold into the rhythm. Seal, send, ride, return. A sailor with wind-burned cheeks jokes that the channel should put up a toll booth for royal ambitions. You tip him in blessed salt because you are out of coins and in favor of metaphors. Then a night of rain, where your dreams smell like wet vellum, and you wake knowing the long contest has begun for real, not as a rumor, but as a climate. The candles make small halos on the table. The baby's breath makes a smaller one on Matilda's sleeve. You recall the day Henry plated the realm in oaths, and the hour Stephen stripped the screws and hung his own sign on the door. Mainstream fact points the road ahead. It will be called the Anarchy by later pens, a long seesaw where England learns how many definitions the word king can wear before it frays. You warm the wax and soften your voice. The first charter of a siege season waits under your hand. The first messenger of a decade of messengers stamps cold off his boots. Outside, a cockcrow mistakes rain for dawn and gets away with it. Inside, you pick up the quill and say the name that a crowned cousin tried to make forgettable. You say it like a map. You say it like a destination. You say it because the oath book is still on the table and somebody has to keep reading. You taste salt before you see the shore. That thin knife edge where England starts again and promises have to stop being sentences and become doors that open. The channel is a gray sleeve tugging at the ship, and you are wrapped in a cloak that smells like wet wool and wax because you tucked the seal case under it to keep the cakes of red and green from cracking. The helmsman watches the sky with a squint that has read more weather than books. You steady yourself against a barrel that thinks it's a goat, and you try not to think about other crossings, other Novembers, other ships that called themselves white. Joke 1 keeps both feet on the deck. You inform the sea very politely that it had its turn with dynastic drama and may stand down now. Night travel means lamps hooded, voices pressed small. A sailor dips the lead line. Its tallow tip brings up a pinch of seabed like a tiny reluctant snack. Fine sand, he grunts, satisfied. And you file away the quirky trick, smear the sounding lead with fat, and the sea tells you what it's holding. The coast slides nearer, a darker dark against the sky. You pass the word down the line. Quiet, oars in, hearts steady. Matilda stands near the prow, face turned into the wind, veil damp. Posture the same patient pillar it was in Mainz, and Rouen and Le Mans. She is not a fugitive, you remind yourself. She is a claimant arriving in her own realm. The difference is mostly paperwork with a sword at the margin. Shingle crunches under the keel. Hands grab, pull, steady. Your boots find pebbles that move like thoughts. The air smells of kelp and wood smoke, and the faint sugar of apples far inland. Men move bundles, women lift chests. The seal case thumps against your hip like a heartbeat you can count on. You whisper names. Arun, Arundel, like a map and a prayer in the same breath. Mainstream fact, to plant a flag. In September 1139, the Empress Matilda crosses from Normandy and takes refuge at Arundel Castle in Sussex, welcomed by her stepmother, the Dowager Queen Adeliza of Louvain, now married to William d'Aubigny. The castle rises ahead of you, a piled-up dusk of masonry and resolve. Adeliza greets you at the gate with a poise that turns a courtyard into a chapel. She is softer than the walls and just as necessary, a woman who learned long ago that mercy needs architecture. She kisses Matilda's cheek, calls her filia, daughter, and the word wraps the yard in a warmth the wind can't find a way through. Servants carry in chests. A steward says something weary about the well's bucket rope and is promptly given a new one because Adeliza runs a house where basics do not fail. Joke 2 nods approval. You swear the Dowager Queen can fix a siege or a pantry with equal efficiency, and possibly at the same time if you hand her the right ledger. Inside, Arundel smells of dry rushes and careful beeswax, of a household that believes in readiness. The chapel's stone holds a small heat that feels like a favor granted. You kneel for a moment because habits learned by candlelight, in better times, cling when the air is sharp. Matilda does not tarry. She confers. Robert of Gloucester is west at Bristol, the anchor, the harbor, the half-brother who keeps his sword sheathed until the geometry of a strike becomes irresistible. Messages fly in, fly out. Men slide maps over boards that once held trenchers. The great hall becomes a desk large enough to write a kingdom on. The siege, when it comes, is formal rather than frantic. Stephen arrives with the force of a man determined to demonstrate that the crown knows the way to Sussex. Banners snap. Heralds recite the proper thunder. A ring of tents grows like mushrooms after rain. The king does not storm. He sits. Arundel, cradled by its moat and its river, looks back with the kind of polite blankness that frustrates impatient men. The walls do not talk. Inside, the fire crackles, the quills scratch, and you discover that waiting, when purposeful, is a weapon. Historians still argue whether Stephen genuinely sought to avoid bloodshed among royal kin, or simply lacked the appetite for a costly assault against a strong fortress. Either way, the tableau is a chess problem. King outside, queen inside, knight moving somewhere you can't see yet. Stephen's courtiers preach loyalty. Adeliza's servants pour ale. Matilda writes, and in her letters she is not besieged. She is busy. The seal warms, the wax takes the emperor's eagle, and the cords press their braid into a convincer. You help count the horses for a ride that does not yet exist but will. You check the larder and note, with a steward's bleak gratitude, that someone foresaw guests who might need to stay through weather and politics both. Quirky tidbit to tuck into the corner of your memory. A barrel of preserved eels sits unbroached in the corner, and even the boldest page won't open it. Arundel keeps all kinds of caution. Then, almost absurdly, chivalry walks into the courtyard carrying a safe conduct. Stephen decides, whether from calculation, courtesy to the Dowager Queen, or a desire to be seen as the kind of king who prefers process to panic, that Matilda may leave Arundel under escort and go to her brother Robert at Bristol. The gate creaks. The air changes. You can feel every eye in the yard measuring the news against the oaths that brought you here. Mainstream fact. The king's decision to allow Matilda safe passage to Bristol becomes one of those moments future quills underline in disbelief. It allowed her to consolidate with Robert and turn a siege into a beginning. Historians still argue whether this was gallant restraint, political theater to isolate her from Adeliza, or a miscalculation that traded a short victory for a long war. You do not argue with fortune that smiles like this. You pack. The seal case, the letters, the wool wraps for the baby's names you carry as leverage more than lullaby. The escort lines up. Stephen's men bright as a sermon on a clear day. Your party, practical in earth tones. You ride under eyes that want very badly to deny what they're seeing. Adeliza stands at the gate, blessing with the kind of nod that doesn't need a priest to carry weight. Joke 3 rides side saddle with you. Someone mutters that if all sieges ended with polite chaperones and a lunch stop, England would sleep better, and you promise, very quietly, to found a committee on civil besieging once you've won a crown. The road to the west writes its own chant. Hedge, hedge, church spire, ford, rise, coppice, in with an honest beam, field where crows make law. Autumn smokes in the ditches. The smell of damp leaves reminds you of charters dried overnight near a hearth. Villagers watch you pass with that careful stillness peasants do when the world's argument rides right through their garden. At a ford, your escort pauses to test the stones. At a hill, you dismount to spare a horse you will need later. Your hands smell of wet leather and the little iron of reins. You count miles the way you've counted clauses, in patient handfuls. Bristol rises not like a castle, but like a decision. Robert's banner lifts from the walls, and the long breath you didn't know you were holding drops into your boots and steadies them. Robert of Gloucester greets Matilda with the short bow of a man who has done court, done battle, and prefers sentences that move. He is tall where rooms are small, grave where jokes overspill, and his presence changes the geometry of the whole map. Mainstream fact to chalk on the wall. In 1139-40, Robert becomes the military backbone of Matilda's cause, turning the West Country into a redoubt of stone and allegiance that Stephen will not crack by bluster alone. From Bristol, the long game unrolls. Letters to lords who wobbled, offers to towns that think trade first, reminders to bishops that oaths love sunlight. You send messengers like seeds ahead of rain. You court Gloucester, Hereford, the Marcher lords whose castles sit like clenched teeth along Welsh edges. You speak with abbots who know more about road conditions than counts pretend to. You reread your list, the gospel, the bone hand, the men who touched both then turned away, and decide which names to read softly and which to carve with a steel nib. At night in Bristol's keep, the wind remembers how to find gaps, and you remember how to warm wax with the heel of your hand. The city below hums with ordinary life, tanners worrying hides, bakers counting loaves, children claiming puddles like tiny kingdoms. And that hum is the point. War will have to learn to move without breaking every window if it wants the towns to love you more than they fear you. You fall asleep with your head against a bag of documents because pillows are for people with less paperwork. In the morning, a rooster in the lower ward announces sun that isn't there yet, and you forgive him because optimism needs practice. You look east, toward Arundel, where chivalry staged a courtesy that turned into a corridor. You look north, toward Lincoln, where someday arguments will wear armor without apologizing. You look within, where a woman taught by emperors and exchequers tightens her gloves. The long game is patient. It uses roads, it thanks dowager queens, dowager. It accepts escorts from rival kings with a smile that remembers everything. You mount. Robert rides at your side, silent, the way weather is silent when it has made up its mind. The first real marches of your claim begin under a sky the color of uninked parchment, waiting for you to write on it. Frost powders the ruts, like flour sifted over a baker's board, and you ride into Lincoln through breath you can see. The city looks tired of kings, tired of claims, tired of banners that change the way wind changes, but it does not get to choose its weather. Stephen is here, stubborn as a nail, half besieging the castle where Ranulph of Chester began the mischief by seizing it months ago. Robert of Gloucester rides at your side with that patient thundercloud look that means arithmetic is being done somewhere behind his eyes. Hooves drum on frozen earth. The air smells of cold iron. A boy selling hot ale on a corner blinks at the size of your hope and your horses. You swing down, boots crunch, and you count the faces that will matter in the next hour. Earls, marshals, men who know how to hold a line even when their teeth chatter. Morning breaks with a sound like cloth torn in God's sewing room. Stephen forms up on a low rise, standard lifting, mail glinting, a crown-shaped silhouette against a pewter sky. Your men spread across the field, Robert anchoring the center, the Earl of Gloucester's lances tight as bread loaves in a basket, Ranulph of Chester quick on the flanks like a fox that has learned to read Latin. Mainstream fact. On February 2nd, 1141, the Battle of Lincoln slams into the calendar, a rare open-field fight in a civil war that more often prefers sieges and paperwork. You feel the ground tell you what it thinks of hooves. Nothing good, but it holds. Joke 1 tiptoes around the edges of your focus. Today's lunch plans are don't, and the dental plan is keep your visor down. The first clash is noise with edges. Lances crack, shields ring, horses scream with human vowels you don't ever get used to. Stephen stands in the press like a man who enjoys terrible committee meetings. He swings with a rhythm born of practice, not panic. A chronicle will later swear his sword shatters and he borrows a Danish axe, chopping until the haft splinters in his hands. Quirky tidbit with the smell of sap in it. And whether the axe came from a comrade or a convenient pile of history's metaphors, you watch the shape of it. A king who refuses to be ordinary. He is brave the way fire is brave in the wrong room. Your line dips, then hardens. Messages flit like winter birds. Left holding, center step, right bite. Robert's voice doesn't carry so much as bend the air. Ranulph's men wheel and nip, refusing to stand still long enough to be properly measured. You notice something almost funny in the blur. Shields that look like families learning to draw themselves. Checks for Warren, lions for the Earl of Gloucester, devices that will be heraldry soon, but are still baby pictures painted on wood. Historians still argue whether early coats of arms helped much on days like this, or whether men kept track of friends by the way they cursed. You suspect both are true. Stephen's household nights cluster tighter, as if willpower were a kind of armor. You stand where you can smell the tin and sweat of their breath. The king staggers, recovers, staggers again. A ring of men goes down around him like wheat scythed against its own better judgment. Then the circle closes, not to protect him, but to take him, hands on arms, mail on mail, a thudding, exhausted certainty. Your heart stutters before your head can choose a sentence. The shouting changes flavor, less iron, more salt, and you understand that something you have rehearsed for 3 winters has happened in 1 untidy minute. The taken king stares at the sky as if it has surprised him. His helm is off, hair matted, face pale, except for that angry, admirable flush men get when their bodies disagree with politics. He yields, the word tastes like pennies, into the custody of Robert of Gloucester. Mainstream fact. Stephen is led from the field a prisoner, conveyed first to Gloucester and then to Bristol Castle, where stone will do what mail could not. As he passes, you see an ordinary human detail you will never tell anyone, the indentation where his coif's strap has pressed his beard flat. Even kings have hat hair. The ride back is cold and very quiet. A standard flaps the way flags do when they have no idea what to say. In the keep, Robert lays out a board that is not chess because chess would be an insult to the complexity of what happens now. He sends messages that are not boasts but planks. He assigns custody with courtesy that feels like winter sunlight. You sit near the brazier and warm the seal until the wax shines like a cherry you are afraid to bite. Matilda's letters go out with a new temperature. The signatures are the same. The world under them is not. Winchester answers first with incense and calculation. Henry of Blois, Stephen's brother and papal legate, a man who can balance a mitre, a ledger, and a weather vane on the same head, summons a council. You enter a city that smells of damp stone and saints' birthdays. The clergy gather under painted beams. The hall fills with a rustle of linen that sounds like prayer, even when what's happening is politics. Henry speaks of the vacancy created by a king in chains, of the need for order, of God's apparent preferences when battle goes a certain way. The words fold themselves naturally, and very conveniently, around your cause. Mainstream fact. In April 1141, at the council in Winchester, the clergy recognize Matilda as Domina Anglorum, Lady of the English, and recommend her for the throne. Her charters begin to style her Angliae Normaniaeque Domina, with a measured certainty you can hear even when the wax is cold. The city hums like a hive that has discovered its queen is a different species of bee. Matilda moves through it with precise gravity, accepting submissions, confirming offices, receiving keys from hands that tremble, either because they're old or because the world has shifted under their boots. She does not hurry. She never hurries. You can feel courtesies being cut to her measurements. The day is placed just so, the gospel book open to the page where the verbs help, the procession timed so the rumor mill can't answer the question before the litany does. Joke 2 peeks over a candle. The usher mutters that thrones should come with assembly instructions and a small bag of spare bolts. You mutter back that you've got spare clauses, which is almost as good. There's a new seal, 2-sided if you please, a rider on one face, a seated figure on the other, sovereignty in motion and at rest. You note the iconography with the appreciation of someone who has had to explain to too many Castellans that pictures are paragraphs. Charters flow like careful water. Sheriffs come to be told to keep doing their jobs but with a different pronoun at the top of the page. The Exchequer's arithmetic, that old Beauclerk hum, resumes its song in another key. You watch clerks adjust without knocking over ink. A kingdom's most underrated virtue. Quirky tidbit. A moneyer from somewhere in the Thames Valley produces shyly a test strike. A coin with an imp on it that looks like it means Empress in a world that is not quite ready to admit coins have opinions. He is sent away kindly and told soon. Robert rides in and out like a tide. He knows the price of a season like this. Every morning your victories need feeding. He checks Bristol's locks. Stephen will not walk out of one of those. They could keep angels if asked. And returns with reports written in the grammar of hooves. Ranulph grins the way men grin, who have been right too loudly. Henry of Blois' smile shows too many teeth to be entirely devotional. You send letters to London that are more caresses than commands, because towns like to be asked to dance, not ordered onto the floor. Historians still argue whether Matilda's choice of Lady of the English instead of immediately claiming Queen was strategic humility to coax civic consent, legal caution while a royal anointing was arranged, or simply the cleanest Latin to fit the moment. Whatever the motive, the title sits on the page like a lamp that promises heat as well as light. For a breath, the realm forgets how to wobble. Men who have waited 3 winters to call the wind a direction step into the street and point. Women who have kept keys while husbands marched, bring them out and teach new stewards which cupboards refuse to open if you don't sing to them. The bells in Winchester play their blunt, cheerful notes. You walk the cloister and let the stone remind your feet what slow feels like. Joke 3 loosens with your exhale. You promise yourself that when all this is over, you will invent a holiday where the only legal document is a nap. Of course, weather remembers its job. From the east comes the noise of Londoners with worries. From the southeast, the steady competence of another Matilda, Stephen's queen, gathering ships and men like a housekeeper who has decided the furniture would look better on the other wall. But that is a drum still a valley away. For now, you stand by a window in Winchester, watching sparrows make treaties with a cold sun, and you hold in your hand a charter that begins Matildis Dei Gratia Anglorum Domina. The wax cools under your thumb, the impression holds. The seal blinks back at you with that particular double calm, rider, ruler, that says the work is both road and chair, both spur and cushion. You breathe in stone and beeswax and a quiet you have earned the hard way. Outside, the bells refuse to apologize for being pleased. Inside, you nod to the clerk. He sprinkles pounce like small snow, and the words that will carry you into the next, rougher street dry into readiness. You hold the new seal like a steadying stone, and feel London drawing you as if the city has a tide. The road slants down through hedged villages toward a smell you can't mistake. River mud, coal smoke, and hot bread from ovens that never learn to sleep. Bells mutter somewhere ahead. Practice rings, cautious rings, because a coronation is a mouthful, and churches like to warm up their vowels. You pass carts layered with furs and salted fish, apprentices trotting beside, hats too big for heads that young. The city gate greets you with timber and rumor. Cheapside opens like a book, each stall a paragraph. Spices, candles, pewter that shines like a polite lie. The wind off the Thames slaps your face and decides to be your friend anyway. Inside Westminster's precincts, the air changes. It smells of stone that has sung for a long time. You tilt your head and test the echo of the word the charters have been using. Domina. You don't say queen out loud yet because the oil isn't on the linen and the hands that must lift it haven't agreed what shape history should be today. Mainstream fact sets the table. In June 1141, after Stephen's capture and Winchester's recognition, you moved to London to arrange an anointing at Westminster. Liturgy ready, regalia within reach, scribes idling the way, hunting dogs pretend to nap. Bishop Henry of Blois, papal legate and brother to the king you've locked in Bristol, hums along at first, his smile filed to the exact curve that makes consent look like leadership. You do the work nobody sees. Lists for processions, which candles, which vestments, the tidy geometry of kneeling so that dignity and practical needs can be reconciled. You consider coins, surely soon, and talk with moneyers who love nothing more than a royal figure that doesn't change every few summers. A man with soot in his eyebrows produces a test flan with EMP scratched like a wish. You smile and tell him not yet the way you once told a nervous captain that boots matter less than the road under them. Quirky tidbit from the sacrist. Coronation gloves are already laid out in a chest with cedar chips to keep moths from feasting on monarchy. He holds one up, white, stiff, needing a hand that won't tremble. You breathe in through your nose and keep writing. Then London clears its throat and asks to see the bill. The city that gilds kings expects confirmation of its liberties and a light hand on purses. You ask for tallage to grease the machinery of legitimacy, and the room grows a degree colder. Merchants talk quickly about privileges that smell like older charters. Fishmongers mutter that the river will not pay your debts for you. Historians still argue whether the sums you demanded were harsh or merely normal crowned prince math dressed in the wrong tone, and whether chroniclers hostile to you, Gesta Stephanie waves helpfully from a desk, exaggerated your imperious manner until the ink itself sat up straighter. You hear the debate in real time, voices in Guildhall, hands on benches, the subtle rumor that Queen Matilda, Stephen's wife, sends letters from the southeast promising a better season for wallets. Bishop Henry's smile shows another tooth. He begins to prefer the subjunctive mood. You feel the papal legate back a step so smoothly you almost admire the footwork. He does not withdraw his hand, not yet. He simply lowers it so the weight on it is lighter. Joke 1 taps the ledger with a feather. You've worked in Chancery long enough to recognize the bureaucratic waltz called support adjusted to current realities. Still, you prepare. In Westminster's choir, you test the acoustics with a low chant, because even politics must land on the right note. In the palace, you instruct stewards to keep the tables sensible. Bread, ale, a small statement of order, rather than a banquet that offends empty pockets outside. You meet the Londoners' delegation in a hall that smells of damp wool and iron buckles. They ask for confirmations, you offer assurances, and somewhere between verb tenses, a chill blows through a crack in the wall you can't find to stuff. Mainstream fact, the Citizens' Assembly, Folkmoot, was called at St. Paul's. Londoners judged the wind, and by late June their patience thinned. Whether it was the money, the tone, the Queen's army, or all three braided together, you can feel a city decide it is safer to wait for another banner. June 24th comes hot and close. A murmur grows in the streets first, then a noise with elbows. Church bells that should be gathering a coronation gather. Instead, a crowd. Women lean from windows with faces that have measured bread. Apprentices thunder by with cudgels they call walking sticks, and every mother calls, "Not in my house." Somebody says the Queen is near, Stephen's Matilda, not you, and that London will not turn its back on the King's wife, even if the King himself sits in a Bristol problem. Carts block alleys. Shutters slam like punctuation. Historians still argue whether the Queen's approach sparked the rising, or Londoners rose first and invited her nearer afterward. The debate smells like hot pitch and river water, which is to say, practical. You feel the doorways grow teeth. A steward runs in, breathless, with a face that says the palace cannot be trusted by its neighbors this hour. Bishop Henry develops a sudden enthusiasm for prayer elsewhere. A messenger from the Guildhall uses the word now with an urbanity that would be funny at a less drafty time. Joke 2 unclenches your jaw for a heartbeat. You realize every city keeps a special emergency voice for telling visitors it is time to leave. And London's is a polite shout. The retreat is so fast it looks like choreography. Robes into chests, chests onto mules, children bundled up without losing them in the crowd. Cheapside becomes a streambed of elbows and spilled apples. You slide along the edges where shop awnings offer scraps of shadow. The smell of sugar cakes tangles with sweat and fear, an unhelpful festival. A fishwife yells that no one is stealing her baskets today, and you believe her with your whole soul. You duck a thrown stone that has less to do with you than with rents and weather and every oath that has ever come and gone like a spring tide. At Ludgate, a man you do not know recognizes you anyway, the way cities learn faces without asking names. He doesn't cheer, he doesn't spit, he only steps aside to let your horse's shoulder pass. It feels like the most expensive kindness you have ever received. On the Fleet Bridge, a wheel catches, a strap snaps. You curse in Latin because street corners teach you fast which language the saints prefer to hear when urgency is a prayer. Robert of Gloucester appears like the answer to a question your body was asking without your consent. He does not scold, he reroutes. West, he says, and the syllable becomes a road. West it is. Out through lanes where drying linen slaps your cheek like a scolded sea. Past the Strand, where houses pretend not to recognize the rush. Along the Thames, where barges bob with a serenity that borders on insolence. You don't look back often. When you do, you see a city's posture. Not triumphant, not broken, simply decided. Mainstream fact. On June 24th, 1141, you flee London as support collapses. The planned anointing evaporates like breath on a pane. Whether anyone actually set out the coronation stool that morning is a detail you stop longing to know. You save your longing for bridges and dry roads. On a rise near Brentford, you let the horse walk and listen for pursuit. None. Yet. Only birds who do not care what pronouns the charters have employed this week. A baker's boy catches up with a sack of rolls he should have sold in the city, stares, and hands them over because the world has made no sense all morning, and he might as well make a gift that does. Quirky tidbit slips in with the crumbs. London bakers often stamped loaves with tiny marks so customers could shame cheaters at the bread assay. You picture a guildsman peering at a crust in the middle of a revolution and feel absurdly comforted by systems that don't panic. Joke 3 arrives with your second bite. You promise yourself that if you ever write a coronation manual, Chapter 1 will read, "Feed the city before you feed the ceremony." You camp short of St. Albans with a sky like a tarnished penny and a wind that smells of river settled into grass. The brazier ticks, the quills stay capped, the gloves go back in cedar. You count the cost. Public relations is a sword that leaves bruises you can't show a surgeon. And you count the stubbornness left in the bag. Enough. Robert's scouts report calm ruts ahead. The Queen's column turns elsewhere for now, toward Winchester, toward the next hinge. Historians still argue whether you could have soothed London with gentler levies, kinder words, or whether any tone would have cracked under the weight of a captive king and a queen who could still march. They argue whether the legate betrayed you or simply surfed the current more skillfully. You nod to all of it, because none of it helps you now, except as weather maps. The candles make small boats of light in the tent. You fold your veil and leave it folded, because for a few days the wind will be your crown and the road your chair. You have learned this lesson from deserts, from German diets, from Norman keeps. Legitimacy is not a moment. It's a route. It can pass through London without stopping and still reach an altar later by a different street. You warm the seal with the heel of your hand, the old habit, the old heat, and press it to a letter that begins with the same words as yesterday's charters did. The wax takes the impression perfectly. The horse tomorrow will too. You lie down with the sound of carts settling and people remembering how to sleep. The city behind you keeps all its doors. The map ahead unfolds like a patient lung. You breathe. Snow begins as a rumor against the slit of sky over Oxford. A hiss on stone. A soft message that winter has decided to be decisive. You walk the inner ward and listen to the castle breathe in slow, cold syllables. Iron contracting, ropes groaning, a sentry's teeth learning how to be a drum. Stephen owns the town now. The streets below salted with his fires. His tents, a pale orchard across the meadows. Arrows come sometimes like thoughts you didn't invite. Mostly what comes is quiet, the siege's favorite tool. The Thames, call her Isis when you want her to pretend to be polite, slides darkly under white, a cautious animal deciding whether to sleep. You pull your cloak tighter and read the sky the way you've learned to read charters, for gaps, for openings, for places where ink might go that no one planned. It has been a long year of reversals. Winchester crowned you with Lady of the English. Then London uncrowned you with the oldest word in a city's arsenal, no. The rout of Winchester snapped like a trap. Robert of Gloucester traded himself for Stephen and turned the board upside down. The king stood up in his crown again, because crowns love a head that is present and available. Mainstream fact settles in with its winter weight. In late 1141, Stephen is freed in exchange for Robert, and by 1142 he is strong enough to bring Oxford to heel, taking the town in a swift strike and hemming the castle so closely that bread counts itself in crumbs. The wells hold, barely. The pantry learns how to be stingy without becoming cruel. A laundress jokes that if anyone mentions lampreys, she will put them on the fire purely to watch them suffer. Joke 1 is tired but serviceable. At least the fish that killed a king can't kill your appetite if you never see them. You pace the wall where St. George's Tower hunches like an old soldier, its stones remembering 11 different versions of hold. Is below, Stephen's men build a bridge of boats across the river and park their machines where they look impressive. Mangonels that cough rocks, rams that clear their throats and then think better of it. Mostly this is siege by winter, by patience, by stomach, by the arithmetic of sacks being lighter today than yesterday. They'll starve us, a sergeant mutters, as if naming the tool disarms it. You nod and move on, counting everything. Loaves, arrows, hands steady enough to pull a bow in this cold. Night closes sooner each day now, as if someone keeps moving sunset forward on the calendar just to be difficult. The snow thickens, a fine, determined fall that sands the edges off everything sharp. In a chamber that smells of damp wool and judiciously rationed tallow, a map lies open like a wound. Abingdon sits 6 miles away, a dark word on pale parchment. Wallingford farther, a promise tucked into the bend of the Thames where Brian Fitzcount mines loyalty like a fire that must not go out. Robert is in the west, steady as a church tower. Between you and any of that, water, ice, a net of enemy fires, and the kind of cold that makes a body reconsider its contract with itself. Tonight, someone says, without raising his voice, because decisions this sharp don't like shouting. The plan opens like a fan. White over white, cloaks turned inside out, so the wool shows, fur muffled, bells strapped with cloth, so they forget how to tell the wind our business. Quirky tidbit to pocket in your mittened hand. Across the North Sea on easier winters, skaters strap bone to boots and glide a mile for every step you'll trudge. Fragments of those bone skates turn up in London mud like tiny white boats that forgot their river. You do not have skates. You have feet, a few sworn men, a habit of moving very still, and a postern gait that has never wanted to be important until right now. Historians still argue whether 4 knights go with you or a slightly larger handful, whether you slip down the castle's frozen moat on a rope or pick a quieter curtain of wall, whether you cross near Folly Bridge or farther down where the current behaves. The snow erases the exactness as if it prefers mystery for once. The gate opens, the way a mouth opens when it might change a life. Snow presses in at ankle height, a cool animal greeting. You step onto ice that wears a sugar crust, a skin you test with your whole body, not your toes. The world goes quiet, the way it only does in snow. Sound pulled into wool, breath fogging and then going away, the Thames considering you without comment. You are taller than you feel under this sky. Your cloak has become a winter hill the wind does not notice. The men with you move like old cats, careful, careful, careful. A distant guard laughs at a joke you will never hear, and you love him for being human to someone else tonight. Across the river, the snow balks at the mud and loses its nerve. You climb the far bank on hands gone wooden. A thorn bush writes its own opinion on your glove. You file it under trivia I will forgive in spring. Behind you, Oxford's towers sulk in their white hoods. Ahead, hedgerows make black ribs against the field. A fox prints quick verses you cannot read. The men step in his lines anyway, trusting his weight calculations more than their own. Joke 2 is a whisper you don't quite let out. You discover that Camouflage 1.0, Wear the Weather, is both effective and very drafty. The first mile is an argument with your breath. The second invents a rhythm, crunch, hush, like a psalm you forgot but your feet remember. Every farm you pass seems to hold its breath too. Once a dog barks, and then barks at the bark, confused by how his voice sounds in a world lined with wool. Once a heron lifts slow from the ice edge, a gray thought that decides to be elsewhere. You taste iron the way you always do when the night has its hand on your back. You feel the red thread on your wrist, the midwife's superstition from a different winter, prickle under your sleeve. You let it. All kinds of threads work in nights like this. A low bell clinks under a horse's breath, one of yours. You stop and smother it with a rag already stiffening with cold. The man's eyes are round and grateful in the dim. Past the meadows, a little rise gives you the first view of how wide the world is when you are small in it. Far away, Stephen's camp is a faint embroidery of ash halos. Closer, the snow holds the dark like tea cloth. Abingdon's roofs hide like turtles. Nearly there, someone hazards, the way people lie kindly when kindness is a skill they have practiced. At the abbey, you knock as if thieves might be listening. Monks open as if God might, and the warm breath of a refectory almost undoes you. Wood smoke, porridge that is honest about being porridge, a clatter of spoons being stern with cold fingers. They say little because vows are practical here. They bring bread because bread does not argue. Mainstream fact nods beside the fire. The chronicles remember a stopping place, Abingdon in some tellings, before the push to Wallingford, and then farther to the safer company of loyal stone. Your hands learn how to thaw slowly so they don't snap. Someone produces ale thin as a memory of summer. It is the best thing you've ever swallowed. A lay brother, shy, sets by a scrap of white wool as if you might need to renew your disguise. Camouflage, replacement part. You tuck it in your sleeve and mean to keep it always. It will be a talisman until moths have their say. Back out, because safety is a verb that can't be conjugated in one place tonight. The road bends where roads always bend just before you ask them to be straight. Hedges thicken, fields give way to that subtle change you can smell when stone is near. You hear the river again, wider now, exhausted and patient, doing its job under a heaviest quilt. The horses, your horses, reclaimed at a miller's barn where kindness was a sack of oats and a look that said, "Say thank you and do not use my name." Step happier than men. The sky turns from black ink to the smudged gray of a scribe's thumb. Wallingford's lights are not many, but they have the persuasive grammar of relief. The gatehouse wakes up with a pout, then with joy. Brian Fitzcount appears wrapped in a cloak that suggests a man who knows how to wait and how to finish. He kisses your hand like a vow, and not like flattery. You are not in yet. You are in. Quirky tidbit to tuck where the thaw will warm it. Brian's constancy is such a byword that a later age will forget he existed at all. Loyal men make poor main characters. But tonight an under-sheriff weeps openly because he believed prayers were for chapels, and now he knows they are for roads. Joke 3 gets to stretch at last. You inform the room that Snow is the best porter you've ever hired. Never asks for wages, just insists you dress appropriately. When you sleep, if you sleep, it will be in a room that smells of straw and iron and the ghost of a green spring you intend to live to see. Before that, a letter for Robert that tells the story without bragging. A line to Rouen that translates relief into strategy. A note to a monk at Abingdon that says thank you in the kind of Latin that means it. Historians still argue whether you rode to Bristol in a second, longer push, or stayed a while in Wallingford to let the frost leave your bones. Either way, the winter has been persuaded to be your accomplice. Morning arrives with the particular pail of days that will take hours to wake fully. Stephen will discover your absence the way all besiegers do, by a silence that wasn't on the schedule. He will stare at the river and consider shouting at a force that does not care. The ice will shrug finally, and later give way, as all temporary friends do. Mainstream fact sets the quill down. December 1142 writes itself into every chronicle with your white-cloaked escape across a frozen Thames, a story so tidy that even skeptics prefer not to tug at the hem too hard. You sit, thawing slowly, and try to consider your toes separate from your destiny. The castle cat decides your cloak is now its bed. You decide to let it win. The siege resumes somewhere that is not here, and for once you are not at subject line. You are the letter that got out. Rouen wakes in river light. A gray that smells of linen hung to dry, and barges rubbing their ropes against wet timbers. You cross the courtyard of the ducal palace with a satchel that has learned the curve of your shoulder, and you breathe in the different quiet of a city that governs by ink first and only reaches for iron when the margins fail. You did not come as a tourist. You came because England has decided to be a weather system for a while, and you need stone that does not move when the wind does. Geoffrey rides the frontiers. You sort the world into piles: petitions, roads, abbeys, and the odd lord who believes a broomsprig badge outranks a charter. While England seesaws, Normandy decides. Geoffrey presses the duchy like a thumb smoothing wax. Caen, Bayeux, Evreux, and at last Rouen itself bending back toward the rule it remembers. Mainstream fact: by 1144, Geoffrey Plantagenet has conquered Normandy and is recognized as Duke. His banners cross the Seine bridges and the cathedral bells make the kind of satisfied noise churches prefer. You watch him accept the keys in that calm way he has when stone finally agrees with geometry. Charters bloom with his name. Roads get drier because men who like horses hate mud. He does the work you always hoped he would grow into, and you write the thank yous to villages that kept their gates polite while the map was being redrawn. England does not stop arguing just because the duchy has decided to sit up straight. Robert of Gloucester, your hinge, your weather eye, holds the west as long as breath allows. Then autumn 1147 comes with its own bitter punctuation. Robert dies, and the West Country's confidence drops a degree like a brazier someone forgot to feed. Mainstream fact anchors the sorrow. His death in late 1147 removes the best general on your side and bruises the arithmetic of every march. You stand a long time by a candle that gutters warns gutters again, and you decide not to watch it go out. Historians still argue whether his passing alone forced your next move, or whether the slow drift of towns toward any peace at all had already written the ending on England's wall. Either way, you pack. In 1148, you cross back to Normandy, home for the first time in a decade, if home is allowed to be a verb. You take rooms in Rouen and learn the streets the way clerks learn their alphabets. Petitioners come in with hats off and hopes on. You listen the way cathedral walls listen, without interrupting, and then with an answer shaped like stone. You begin to sign not as a claimant in a civil war, but as a duchess with a desk. The wax takes the eagle from your old imperial seal and somehow looks less like an argument than it used to. Quirky tidbit you tuck into your new routine. Rouen's mintmen can talk about die cutting for an hour with the same reverence abbots reserve for relics. And if you let them, they'll show you test strikes with crosses so tidy they make your shoulders relax. Meanwhile, your eldest grows like a decision made on time. Henry, born howling at Le Mans, and now a quick-eyed adolescent whose boots always look recently muddy, tries England on his own terms in 1147, and discovers that enthusiasm is not a supply chain. Mainstream fact with gossip's grin. After his funds ran out, it's often said Stephen himself gave the lad money to go away safely. You picture the king counting coins with the rueful practicality of a man who prefers solvable problems. Historians still argue whether Stephen truly bankrolled his rival's teenage experiment, or whether a later teller gilded the story to flatter both men's sense of chivalry. Joke 1 folds the purse closed. Either way, you remind Henry that budgeting is not treason against courage, it's what keeps courage in the saddle. The next year, he seeks a sharper edge for his posture. In 1149, at Carlisle, your great-uncle David of Scotland, saintly eyebrows, iron in his prayers, dubs the boy a knight. Mainstream fact, the knighting by King David I becomes one of those lines chroniclers copy with neat hands. It ties your prince to a northern crown and to the grammar of adult obligation. Henry rides back south with a new clatter in his stride and an improved sense of where his feet go during ceremonies. Historians still argue whether Carlisle's moment signaled a serious northern campaign that fizzled or a symbolic blessing on a future that needed one. You keep the memory because it smells of heather and decision. From Rouen, you stage manage the duchy while Geoffrey continues to be happiest outdoors. You read road reports that sound like weather. Fords mended, culverts cleared, a new packhorse bridge where the last one sulked into the river, and you sign off on market protections so villages can go back to the commerce that remembers what peace tastes like. Abbeys petition for exemptions. You grant the ones that make sense and write a stern but kind no to the ones that think piety should double as tax strategy. Your desk collects thank you cheeses, which you reallocate to the guards because your supper still prefers bread, stew, and a quiet conscience. Joke 2 sits on the corner of the ledger. You note that governance, like housekeeping, improves remarkably when everyone knows where the keys live. Geoffrey, always the practical showman, chooses a moment and sets a stage for lineage. In 1150, he yields Normandy to young Henry in name, training wheels that look suspiciously like a real bicycle. Mainstream fact. Around 1150, Henry is acknowledged as Duke of Normandy. The next year, 1151, King Louis VII invests him formally, a Capetian nod that tastes like lemon but remains a nod. You watch your son receive homage with the sort of stillness you used to practice in Mainz. Chin level, eyes steady, sentences that land like tent pegs driven true. Historians still argue whether this early transfer of the ducal title was shrewd statecraft or a father's impatience to get to his next project. You call it good parenting with excellent stationery. You keep the lights on behind the title. Charters from your desk favor bridges and market days, because soldiers like roads and bakers like predictable mornings, and both of those tastes keep the realm quieter than a dozen stern sermons. You mediate a quarrel between a viscount who loves tolls and a town that loves not paying them. You split the difference with a rate that annoys everyone equally. A sure sign you got it right. Monks from Beck ask for timber. You arrange it and extract, in exchange, a promise to copy a legal text you want in more than one library. Quirky tidbit. The scribe who brings you the fair copy leaves a doodle in the margin, a tiny broom sprig next to Henry's name, and you decide to forgive him because affectionate jokes are cheaper than rebellions. News from England arrives like weather telegrams. Stephen and his son Eustace push and rest, push and rest. Your ally, Brian Fitzcount, holds Wallingford like a man who has married a castle and intends to keep the vows. Garrison lists smell of damp wool. Sheriff's names shift like shingles in a wind. You write across the channel without sighing, because sighing bends paper. You send Henry when a presence is worth 3 letters. You hold him when a letter is safer than a presence. Historians still argue whether your 1148 withdrawal ended your English ambitions or simply relocated the office to a place with better odds. Your outbox answers, relocated. And then, the way seasons do what they want whether you schedule them or not, another door opens in France, one that will matter greatly to a growing duke with steady hands. You hear it first as a rumor, then as an annulment, then as a woman with a map for a dowry. You don't write her name yet, you let the future finish introducing itself. But you sharpen your quill, because the duchy you sit inside is about to be one flank of something much larger. Joke 3 hums like a kettle not quite boiling. You've spent a lifetime discovering that alliances are just marriages with extra paperwork. Sometimes, delightfully, marriages are alliances with better dinners. For now, you close the shutter against the river fog and listen to Rouen settle. Carts done clattering, market cats triumphant, the Seine sounding like a long exhale under the bridge piles. Geoffrey rides in late with mud to his knees and satisfaction to his eyebrows. Henry reads by candlelight, lips moving, the Latin crisp, the margins neat because he knows you will check. Mainstream fact, one last signpost for the night. By the early 1150s, your son is duke in name, practiced in courtesy, and increasingly fluent in the arithmetic of men and miles. You bank the brazier, stack the charters, and trace with one finger the tiny ridges the seal leaves when it bites the wax just right. Normandy holds. England smolders. The boy you rocked between law and lullaby sharpens his inheritance one clause, one ride, one bow, one bridge at a time. You stand at a window in Rouen while the river squeezes dawn into thin silver, and you feel a tug from the west as clear as a bell. England asking for an ending. Geoffrey has left a neat stack of roads and castles behind him. Henry paces like a young wolf who learned to open gates by reading hinges. He carries new weight lightly. Aquitaine by marriage. Yes, that rumor became a wedding in 1152. The ink dry before chroniclers could sharpen their quills. So your son now wears 2 big capes at once. The old Norman Angevin one, and a Gascon blue cloak stitched with vineyards. You make the joke privately that tailoring has replaced geography, then tie off a roll of letters and hand him counsel the way you always have. Quiet, sharp, foldable. He kisses your brow as if it were a signet and takes ships for England in winter 1153, because patience has a season and he can feel it ending. Joke 1 leans on a coil of rope. Nothing motivates a 20-year-old like a crown that keeps pretending it's busy. The land receives him with weather, which is to say, with policy you can't argue with. Storms tear fleets, supplies slip, but men from the west, your faithful Robert's old country, open doors. Mainstream fact, Henry lands in January 1153 and begins a campaign made more of sieges and stairs than of grand battles, his banners turning up where Stephen's grip is tired. He kisses shrines along the way because saints are the only officials who answer mail on time. You, in Rouen, answer the other kind of mail, charters for markets that must survive the march, letters to abbots who prefer peace to kings. Instructions to sheriffs who will follow order if order knows their names. The standoff that matters comes at Wallingford in the heat of the summer. Two old citadels glare at each other across a river that wants nothing to do with either of them. Stephen arrives to pry Brian Fitzcount's fingers from his ramparts. Henry arrives to pry Stephen's army away from its comfort. Lines form, lines falter, and then the river remembers it's the only adult in the room and overflows the banks, politely relocating everyone's tents and self-importance. Quirky tidbit to hang from your belt. Chroniclers mention parley on a bridge or island. A choreography of courtesy with spears politely nearby, and the odd local ferry doing brisk business in truces. Historians still argue whether the clergy forced that meeting, whether the swollen Thames did, or whether fatigue finally spoke louder than trumpets. You vote for all three. Good compromises like a three-part harmony. While the soldiers stand in water and honor, grief writes the decisive line elsewhere. In August, Stephen's son Eustace, capable, impatient, raised to inherit, dies suddenly while harrying an abbey's lands near Bury St. Edmunds, say some. At a meal, say others. Mainstream fact, unkind and unignorable. Eustace's death in 1153 knocks the main leg from the table of resistance. Chroniclers with sharp quills call it divine judgment for rough treatment of monks. Kinder ones call it a sorrow with terrible timing. Historians still argue whether the prince died of illness, stroke, or narrative necessity in hostile pens. You only know letters fall quieter when they carry condolences. The air after that is easier to breathe, and Theobald of Bec, Archbishop of Canterbury, calm as a well-run scriptorium, steps forward as if he has been waiting for this page. Stephen meets Henry at Winchester, and again at Westminster. Words are measured, clasped hands inspected as if they were seals. The settlement takes its public name from a holy house, because peace enjoys watching itself signed, the Treaty of Winchester, though Wallingford will claim paternity forever. Mainstream fact? In late 1153, they agree that Stephen will remain king for life, that Henry will be recognized as heir, that adulterine castles, those unruly mushroom towers, should be slighted, that foreign mercenaries should go home to complain about English weather, and that Stephen's surviving son William will keep his lands with honor. You can almost hear the realm's shoulders drop a fraction, like a porter allowed to set down a trunk. You read the text when it crosses the channel and nod at its grammar. If, then, while, until, peace knitted from conjunctions. Joke 2 taps the parchment politely. It turns out England can be ruled by clauses when swords are tired, provided the clauses are short, and everyone promises to use their inside voices. You add a line in your own ledger. Send thanks to the abbots who hosted the talks and extra candles to the churches whose floors bore all that pacing. Henry keeps his vow to be everywhere at once until the year forgives him for not being supernatural. His presence is a solvent. Stubborn garrisons lose their taste for loneliness. Stephen's face changes subtly, relief shading sorrow, a man setting his jaw to finish well anyway. You write to sheriffs, reminding them that obedience to a living king and acknowledgement of an heir can coexist in one chest without biting each other. Historians still argue whether this peace would have come without Eustace's death, whether weather, weariness, or Theobald's gentle hammer worked the miracle. The debate creaks like an old bridge. You cross anyway, because on the other side sits a Lovern 54 with a chair in it. Autumn inks the hedges darker, and Dover learns to toll. Stephen, who rode too many roads to be surprised by any of them, dies on October 25, 1154, at Dover Priory. He is buried at Faversham Abbey, the house he raised with his queen when history looked like it might be kinder. Mainstream fact brace. The crown at last has one head to consider. Henry and Eleanor make for Westminster with the quickness of people who have rehearsed humility, but know their lines for pomp. On December 19, 1154, Theobald anoints Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine in a ceremony that smells of tallow, frankincense, and relief. You imagine the oil shining on your son's brow like a seal made of light. You imagine coins that will not feel imaginary in people's hands. You do not cross for the crown. Ruin needs your desk. But your counsel crosses in packets tied with the old neat cords. You advise without headlines. On sheriffs who keep receipts and tempers, on raising the right castles without inviting nostalgia to become rebellion, on kissing London's hand before you ask it to open its purse. You remind him that the exchequer hum he loved in his grandfather's stories depends on rhythms, not miracles. You suggest Theobald as the hinge for reforms. He listens. You suggest that knights prefer roads to sermons. He funds bridges. Your letters to Eleanor are sisterly. Two women who own brass spines discussing dower, patronage, and the correct temperature of courtiers. Quirky tidbit that makes you smile into your sleeve. Someone sends you a test penny, crude, early, but honest, with Henry Rex around a face that looks like a nervous baker. The mint will do better soon, but the little coin sits on your window like a herald who arrived a week early. The new court runs on chores, which is to say on Justice Ayers that actually ride, on Fisk that counts without growling, on sheriffs who discover that losing a job is no longer a theoretical exercise. Henry does the kingly storm, booming, brisk, bored by delay, and then, when the doors close, he copies your habit of stillness before a decision. You hear it in the messengers' voices. You see it in charters that stop apologizing for their verbs. Historians still argue whether you pull more strings in these first years than the surviving paperwork lets on, whether your shadow on the tapestry is longer than the woven thread dares to show. You refuse to make a scene about credit because advice is a craft you practice for outcomes, not for footnotes. Joke 3 dries on the seal. If government is a choir, you're content to be the alto who hits the note that lets the sopranos shine without breaking glass. Christmas 1154 passes under well-behaved bows. In the years that follow, your hand will appear in quiet places, advising on the restoration of royal lands, smoothing a quarrel in Normandy before it learns to walk to England, reminding your son that bishops who write well can build as sturdily as masons who stack stone. You keep one eye on Aquitaine's wandering nerves. You keep the other on the Channel, which has stopped trying to drown kings for now and gone back to its proper business of scolding fishermen. The lampreys are someone else's problem. The wax is warm. The cords tie straight. You sit by the window in Rouen again. The Seine leans past the quay with the patient shoulder of a thing that knows it will outlast everyone's signatures. On your table, a pen, a seal, and a small broomsprig brooch that still makes you roll your eyes and smile. The Anarchy has turned into a calendar again. Peace never stays, but it visits longer when summoned by law and fed by roads. You press a letter for London with a thumb that has outlasted 4 kinds of crowns and 2 kinds of winter. Then you tell the brazier to behave, and it does. You live by a river that remembers every ship, in a city that prefers law to trumpet calls. Rowen's morning tastes of wet rope and warm bread, and your days begin with keys that open desks rather than gates. You move through the ducal palace with a satchel that creaks pleasantly, wax cakes, pounce, a traveling ruler, and you sit where the light lies evenly across parchment, because fair decisions like fair light. Petitioners arrive in couples. A prior with a grievance about tolls on a bridge rebuilt in the wrong place. A fishmonger with hands like rope asking that the market bell not ring before his nets are in. You listen the way cathedral stone listens, without interrupting, and you answer in sentences that fit doors without splinters. Joke 1 leans over your shoulder. After a lifetime of arguments with crowns, it's almost restful to arbitrate between a bell and a fish. Letters have learned your cadence. You write to sheriffs about rutted roads and insist that quarry stone be accounted like coin. You write to abbots about ferries and remind them that piety also pays for planks. Mainstream fact steadies the desk. In the 1150s and early 1160s, you act as the king's chief counselor in Normandy, managing administration from Rouen, while Henry II spends seasons in England and Anjou. Your handwriting is a kind of road, and the messengers who follow it sleep better than soldiers used to. Quirky tidbit. The cathedral's treasurer swears a certain sand from a bend in the Seine keeps ink from bleeding. He keeps it in a jar labeled like a relic, and you indulge him because the lines really do look sharper. Sometimes the news from England rumbles like distant weather. Assizes, scutages, campaigns that teach castles to be doors again instead of obstacles. Sometimes it thunders. When Thomas Becket plows his stubborn furrow across your son's temper, you do what you have always done. You write. Your letters to Henry sound like a hand on a bridle, firm, not unkind. Your letters to the Archbishop sound like a hand on a stole, respectful, not credulous. You tell one to bend and the other not to break. You tell both to finish the argument with altars unbroken. Historians still argue whether you favored Beckett's case or simply favored peace, whether your counsel softened policy or merely softened letters. Your quill remembers the truth it can prove. You asked for reconciliation, and you meant it. Rouen is not all paper. You ride out to see where a flood has lifted a bridge from its footings and set it down crooked as a question. You stand with masons who teach you that a good stone lies obediently under a chisel and a bad one sulks until a cart tips. You back a small hospice on the road south so the lame can rest indoors. You endow an altar where bargemen shove off at matins so their prayers ride out with them. You send to Beck for a copy of a legal tract, because abbots write tidier Latin than most men with swords, and tidy Latin makes fewer enemies. Joke 2 hides a smile in your sleeve. You still ban lampreys from your kitchen. Not because of superstition, you assure the steward, but because you enjoy living. Your sons write in different inks. Geoffrey, the younger, reports from Nantes with a soldier's economy of adjectives. Henry, the king, writes from Westminster with sentences that stand up straight, the way you taught him, and end on time. He visits when he can, and when he can't, he sends a test coin the way other sons send flowers. You keep one under your paperweight. Henri Rex, a face that looks less like a nervous baker now and more like someone who has learned how to be on a coin without showing his nerves. Eleanor writes too, in a style that reminds you of polished harness. Bright, complicated, functional. And the two of you trade advice like well-fitted buckles. Repair men before you replace them. Repair roads before you repair men. Mainstream fact hums in that correspondence. The Angevin Plantagenet weave. Anjou, Normandy, Aquitaine, and England. Tightens into an empire that doesn't call itself one. Held as much by itinerant justice and counted coin as by banners. Your house grows quieter. You prefer thick shutters and thin candles. Your knees prefer shorter stairs. You sometimes work at the Priory of Notre-Dame-du-Pré outside Rouen, where the air smells of lime wash and orchard and the nuns keep an honest schedule you admire. You take a small cell when you want to think, not because the world cannot find you, but because you want it to knock first. Historians still argue whether you took informal vows of obedience at the Priory or merely lived close to its rule. Your life answers by being useful, whichever word you choose. The prioress sends you honey when your cough lingers. You send her wool when the winter does. On a warm day you step into Rouen Cathedral and let your eyes climb the stone. A mason shows you where he set an extra chisel mark, small as a nail head, at the base of an arch, his private game to see if his work will outlast his name. You press a coin into his palm and say that names are a kind of coin too. Near the choir, you pause where future will meet stone. Your epitaph is not carved yet, but you already know what you want it to remember, and in time it will. Magna ortu, major matrimonio, maxima prole. Great by birth, greater by marriage, greatest in her offspring. Quirky tidbit. A young clerk practices the phrase and blushes because the vowels make him feel as if he swallowed a candle. The river keeps time. Its shoulder leans past the quay in every season. Its gulls learn to swear in 3 languages. You count years by roads finished, by bridges with fewer excuses, by the number of charters that no longer need to introduce you to people who have accepted which pen writes their mourning. When spring comes early, you walk the garden at the Priory and think of hedges you mended in words. When winter hangs back like an argument past its point, you warm the wax with the heel of your hand and think of nights in Oxford when the river pretended to be a road. One afternoon, the cough refuses to argue. The sisters pad in and out with hot cloths and cooler voices. A priest reads a psalm that rhymes with your breath. You are 65, an age that makes chroniclers generous and ready to sleep without keeping one ear on the door. Mainstream fact places the date and the place, September 10th, 1167, Notre-Dame-du-Pré, Rouen. They bring you the small oil that smells of olives and obedience. Someone opens the shutter an inch so the river can sign the last document of the day. Your last act of governance is a whisper nobody hears. steady. They bury you in Rouen Cathedral so the bells will not have to walk far to visit. Your tomb will be moved in later centuries, war rearranges furniture, and your epitaph will do its quiet work, a ladder of a sentence up which anyone with a claim to impossible days can climb. Historians still argue whether almost queen is insult or laurel. The roads across your son's kingdom answer that question by existing. Joke 3 rides out by habit. You tell the mason to make the letters deep enough that even a winter with cold fingers can read them. You tell the treasurer that if he must economize on candle ends, he may use your old wax, which still holds an impression. Years fold. Your legacy walks in boots and writes in clauses. Eyres that move, sheriffs that fear audits, bridges that know their jobs. When a clerk in a distant shire warms wax with the heel of his hand, he performs a domestic magic you taught a generation of the realm without introducing yourself. The broomsprig keeps blooming on sleeves you will never tug. A prince's coin sits steady on tables that don't rock. Your name makes a neat hinge in chronicles, but your true monument is a country that remembers how to count again, how to travel, how to sleep with doors latched and not barred. You stand at the window where the river squeezes silver out of dawn, and remember a girl in a cold hall, a ship that broke its heart in the channel, oaths on a silver arm, a safe conduct that turned a siege into a corridor, snow that decided to be a road, bells that accepted a title because the work behind it was already being done. Almost Queen is a crown in its own grammar. You wore it as if it were a useful hat. The wax cools, the seal holds, the river goes on being a river. You close your eyes to the old, good sound of parchment drying into law. Let the room dim until the edges soften, until the furniture remembers it is only wood and shadow. The river outside goes on making the same gentle sound it has made for centuries. A long, steady hush that could be prayer or tide. You don't have to decide. The desk cools. The wax on the last letter holds its shape. The cord lies quiet. Somewhere down the corridor, a tired bell asks the hour to be kind, and the hour obliges by moving slowly, like a boat crossing a calm reach. You can set the satchel down now. You can take the weight off your shoulder and notice how light feels, like water poured into a cup you didn't know was empty. The roads you walked keep walking without you. The bridges remember their lessons. The doors you opened for other hands to close and open will keep their hinges oiled. Breathe the low, warm breath of the room. Beeswax and linen, a leaf of bay hung by a careful hand. Let the day fold itself, neat and small, into the drawer where you keep the good pens. If thoughts arrive, let them be as soft as footfalls on rushes. Nothing to trip over, nothing with edges. If a memory insists, give it a chair near the window and let it watch the river until it forgets to argue. Here, you have time. More than time. You have quiet, which is what you wanted all along, and what you built, patiently, for other people to live in. Feel your breath lengthen, cool at the nose, warm in the chest, easy without being told how. Feel the weight behind your eyes turn to velvet. Names, dates, laws. Let them drift like small boats released from their ropes. Not lost, just allowed to wander. The river keeps them all in reach. And as the light thins to the faintest silver, as the last page dries and the last thought settles, let yourself ease into sleep the way a seal eases into wax. Slowly, completely, leaving only a calm impression that tomorrow will recognize and smile at.